Recording in progress.
Hi, folks. Embarrassingly, I left my other pair of glasses, my good ones, in the car out front. So give me another minute, and please take your seat. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to a regularly scheduled meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee this July 24th, although we're starting a little bit early. I imagine that most people in the audience in the room and probably online are here for the second item, which is the public hearing on the Village Center Overlay District. The reason we're starting at 6:30 is we have another relatively, to that issue, a relatively quite minor issue, but nonetheless one which had to be scheduled. And we'll take that up first. It is also a public hearing, but it has to do with cleaning up some zoning on some contiguous lots in one part of the city. And as soon as that item is described and anyone who wants to speak to it may. The committee will have a little bit of discussion. We'll see if we can come to terms with it tonight. If not, and it's getting on in time, we will start the public hearing for the Village Center Overlay District. So, at the beginning of the meeting, as some of you know, I'm Deb Crossley, chair of the committee and counselor at large from Ward 5. In the room with me this evening from the committee are Councillor Holly Ryan, Ward Councillor Ward 8, Councillor Pam Wright at large from Ward 3, Councillor Susan Albright, President of the City Council at large from Ward 2, Councillor Allison Leary at large from Ward 1. And with the help of my committee clerk, are other members of the committee here. And Councillor Krinsman is joining us online this evening. He is at large from Ward 4. Other councillors in the room, Councillor Mark Laredo, and I'm going to ask Mr. Kelly Brown, who is chair of the Planning and Development Board, who join us for all of these matters, to announce the members of his committee who are present.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm joined in person here by members Amy Dane, Lee Breckenridge, Peter Doringer, and Vice Chair Kevin McCormick, and as well as ex officio member Barney Heath. I'm not immediately seeing others online, but unless somebody sees one, yeah. I think that's it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I also see that we are joined by Councillor Alicia Bowman and Councillor Chris Markowitz. I don't know if I've missed anyone. It's hard to see the whole list from here, as I say regularly. We are also joined by Director of Planning, Barney Heath, and the Chief of Long Range Planning, Zachary Lamel. And from our Law Department, Attorney Andrew Lee. And our trustee committee clerk, Jacqueline Norton, is with us tonight, having just returned from vacation, which she was well deserved. And we have been joined as well in the room by Councillor Rick Lipoff at large from Ward 8. Okay, so for this first meeting, first item, I'll read it into the record, and then I believe we've been joined by the petitioners and the petitioner's attorney, who will give us a brief presentation on this item. It is 205-23. Terrence P. Morris, Esquire, petitioning to amend the City of Newton zoning map by changing the current zoning of the property known as and numbered 132 Charles Street, Newton, Mass., and shown on the City Assessor's Map database as Section 41, Block 6, Lots 14, currently zoned multi-residence 1 and manufacturing, and Section 41, Block 6, Lot 6, currently zoned manufacturing, all to mixed use 1. So, I believe I begin with the petitioner on this one to please come forward, Mr. Morris, and give us a summary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm virtual here. I'm going to be presenting from that position. I trust that all the members of the committee had read the Planning Department report on this matter. which I must say is quite comprehensive and in detail. As a result, I will simply outline the elements of the proposal because I understand that you have more important matters to engage later on. Probably the most significant part of this site is that, as the planning department notes, it's isolated by the railroad, the Charles River, and the Massachusetts Turnpike in a corner of Ward 4. It is largely the patchwork of zoning, manufacturing, multi-residence 1, multi-residence 2 is largely a function, a remnant of the going back to the days when the Turnpike Authority came through the city. And this parcel was left in its current state of zoning. My petition is WZ DNA Lab LLC own the parcels that are the subject of this petition, which includes all of the parcels in that triangular area except for one which is privately owned. We are proposing to rezone them to a mixed-use district, and in arriving at that choice of zones, we tried to basically choose a zone that was not too far afield from manufacturing and represent essentially the kind of transitional land use that is allowed in that district. The current use actually of the property is as a laboratory and office space, and the rezoning would not affect that other than to fully authorize the use throughout the properties that comprise the subject parcel. I think that as the planning department memo says, that principal objective of the rezoning would be to create consistency among the adjacent parcels. The proposed uses as lab space and office space are allowed by right, but it's important to note that under the present dimensional standards and controls, those uses could not be significantly increased without further review by the city council under the existing zoning. I guess I would simply conclude by saying that the planning development department recommendation was put forward basically to simplify the zoning for the area and to reduce the existing ambiguity in terms of what's allowed and permitted within this district. That really concludes the presentation, Madam Chair, but obviously here available for answers to any questions the committee may have.
Thank you so much, Mr. Morris. Mr. Lamel, do you have anything to add to that? Or Mr. Heath?
Yeah, I can take you through a real quick kind of visual of this. Thanks, Jacqueline. So yes, this is, as has been stated, kind of an isolated parcel. You can go to the next slide. So I'll just take you through the quick background, the zoning, the request, and anticipated impact. So, yep, these are the two parcels down at the end of Charles Street. One is a residential building that's former use was childcare, and the other is an office building. The current use for that building is lab, research, and office, which is permitted by right currently in manufacturing, but would also be permitted in the MU1. Both of the properties are owned by the same entity. Next. So here's the current zoning that exists today. It's a mix of manufacturing and multi-residence districts. The single family zone across the way is split by the rail line, so this is really an isolated spot. Next, please. This is just a blow up of the two parcels, and request to zone both parcels to MU1. Next, please. Yep. This is just taking a look at the adjacencies in terms of zoning. So you can see the parcel 126 to 132, surrounded by vacant land, the Charles River Trust land, single-family homes on the other side of the MBTA tracks. Next, please. Again, the recommendation from the staff is the property is already highly isolated. The new construction options are limited. And the MU1 is a zone that would permit the current uses, and likely any expansion of uses would have to come back as a special permit. I think that's it.
Thank you very much. I think I saw that Councilor Krinsman has his hand up, still does. Councilor Krinsman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions. I don't know that I have any concerns with this, but I'm definitely confused about two things. One, maybe Mr. Heath, maybe you can help me with this one. It looked like on the map you showed, it still had two different zonings under the proposed zoning slide. And I thought the memo articulated that it was going to be MU1 across both parcels, sort of the whole triangle.
Yes, so one of the pieces of property not included is, I don't know, Jacqueline, if you want to pull up the map again. So the request is only for the two parcels owned by the same entity that is seeking the rezoning. It doesn't include a parcel on the corner there, which is currently a vacant parcel.
I see. Okay, so the MU1, that the blue shading there is over 126 and 132.
That's correct. Yeah,
and
both
the left
parcels.
of that is the unimproved vacant parcel.
Right.
That's retained.
Yep.
Gotcha. Okay, that helps. Thank you. And then I guess my question is, why? Why are we doing this? And I say that because, again, not that I necessarily have a concern with it, but is there some use either currently that isn't allowed under the zoning that would be allowed under the new zoning? I thought the memo indicated, and I think Mr. Morris, you indicated that there was no planned change of use. So I'm unclear as to why the zoning change is needed.
I'm gonna let Mr. Morris speak to that because it's his client that's requesting the change.
Sure.
My clients acquired the property in two different acquisitions over the last 2 years. And they, basically it's a cleanup. People recognize that it's the current zone, to the extent that it's zoned multi-residence 2 and multi-residence 1 is not appropriate. And manufacturing, anything less than manufacturing actually gives the city more control on the ground. So it's largely a maintenance item.
So your client has hired you and is spending money to change the zoning across the parcels for no reason other than to clean it up or feel better?
No, I think that they would have the ability to come back if they choose to expand in the future, but they first would have to cross the hurdle of having to do what they're attempting to do now, which is rezone the property. This gives
But
them
a lot of people seem to do that as part of the special permit process. So I don't understand why your client wouldn't do it at that time. It feels like I'm missing something.
No, you're not. That's what they chose to do, and that's what they hired me to do, and that's, you know, they said, can we get this done? And I said, sure, you file a petition to do it, and that's why we're here. And
so
looking at the current patchwork of zoning, it certainly makes sense to do it. And I think the planning department memorandum reinforces that.
Yeah, the planning department memo, I agree, seems to speak in favor of that. But will the use of the parcel change? I know there was an indication that at the moment one of the buildings is vacant, I think, right?
No, they intend to convert that to offices. which they could
Wait.
not do, if it was on MR1.
So one of the reasons
Or-
for this
or
is to
man-
convert a building to office use.
The plan is to basically convert the present building to office space. I can say that with a degree of certainty because I've had that conversation with my clients.
Okay, so it sounds, so now what I'm hearing is that there is a planned change in use of the parcels, which would
off-
not be allowed under today's zoning.
Office space is allowed under the mixed use zone. Manufacturing, I'm not sure entirely what the limitations on manufacturing, but it seems incongruous.
Okay, thanks, Mentor. I'll let others go. I'll hold off for now.
Thank you, Councilor Krinsman. I'm going to go next to Councilor Wright, but before I do, could planning, or I'm going to ask planning this. It was my understanding in reviewing this that the existing buildings are not proposing an addition at this time, but that the change of zone literally goes through one of the buildings. Was that part of the issue? Mr. Lamelt, can you speak to that?
I think that is part of the issue here, but again, Attorney Morris can speak to that. I believe that was part of the request, and I think it would be helpful actually to clarify which building you were talking about in terms of office. Is it the current office building or is it the residential building?
It's the residential building, Mr. Heath, and actually to answer Councilor Crispin's question about office space is permitted in the manufacturing zone.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councilor Wright and then Councilor Markowitz, and then we do have to open a public hearing this evening on this item.
I had the same questions as Councilor Krinsman, so I don't have any further. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'll go to Councilor Markowitz and then President Albright.
And I'll be economic as well, Madam Chair. I think Councilor Krinsman asked the right questions. My only observation here, and I think this stands out. This is almost like a land use way of thinking of this. Mr. Morris is quite aware of that. I think the cleaning it up, so to speak, into one zone for a parcel like that makes sense. The question, the only real question I have is there a significant change in what would be an allowed use? I took a quick look at the matrix. I didn't see anything. Obviously, housing would be allowed under either scenario, but the difference is because the parcel now has so many different zones in it, you're limited in what you can do to amount of space. So what you're doing here is opening the whole thing up to a single consistent zone, which again does make sense in that regard. But you could have something like now the lab, the by right lab activity could now expand to the entire parcel as opposed to where now it is probably confined to part of the parcel. So that's really what the change is here. So is in any of the allowed uses that would come under MU1, would they be much greater in scale relative to what you have now and in a way that would cause a concern, and I'll help the petitioner here on the one side and say, again, in a lot of those cases, you might bump up against a special permit anyway. But I think that's the real question. It's the allowed uses, and are we introducing something significant either way that we might be concerned about, given this, the size of the combined parcel? I don't know that there is, but I think that's the question. I don't know if planning can answer that. It's really kind of a nitty-gritty sort of, map one thing to another. Again, I don't see that as a reason to deny this. I just think that's the question. Thanks.
Sure, thank you, Councilor Markowitz. Planning, do you have a comment on this?
I think Councilor Markowitz is right on in terms of the uses. If you look at the use table, you can go right down the uses for the MU1, and it does provide for some additional uses. A lot still require a special permit. It also, by moving from industrial to MU1, you eliminate whole categories of industrial uses as well. So there's a bit of a trade-off. And it's kind of hard to respond to what exactly could or could not be allowed in terms of size. The dimensional regulations are outlined in the memo. So some would require a special permit, some wouldn't, depending on whether or not they comply with the dimensional requirements.
Okay. I'm going to go to President Albright. And if there are no additional hands, I would like to open the public hearing after that.
I have a quick question, and I think Mr. Heath answered it, but I just wanted to be sure. On the MR2 part that's not being rezoned, is there anything there now?
No, it's a piece of vacant land.
Okay, thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to open the public hearing. Is there anyone in the room who wants to speak on this item? Seeing none, I am going to go online, and I have two hands up. Amy Sangiolo, you are first.
Hi, good evening. My name is Amy Sangiolo. I'm a resident at 389 Central Street and an abutter to the property. I want to thank ward councilors Krinsman as well as Markowitz and Pam Wright for raising the very same questions I had. I am concerned about losing that existing building, which could provide housing. I think it's a 3-family right now. Losing that to office space. So, but thank you, Attorney Morris, for sharing that is the intent to do it. I mean, at a time where we're screaming for housing, it's really sad to see housing lost, especially if it's existing. I don't know whether that house is also historic. I didn't get a chance to go and review that, but that also could be an historic resource. With regard to the changing of the zone, I do understand the desire to make it all consistent, but as Councilor Krinsman had mentioned, it's usually done while you're looking at a special permit or a plan, a grand master plan for what this property would ultimately become. And I think, at least from my perspective, that would be a better time to go and change the zoning. I thank you for your time and your consideration, and I'd ask that you not deny it, but at least delay it so that we can get more information and answers to the question. I don't think that Councilor Krinsman's question about the, he said something about the change in zone for the current MR1. I don't think that was answered, but I'll go back to my notes. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Sangiolo. I had seen another hand up, but I don't see any more now. Is there somebody else? Doris Hansweet, did you want to speak? I don't see your hand up currently, but you're muted if you do want to speak.
No, I actually came in late, so I didn't hear that first part.
Okay, all right, thank you. Does planning have any further comments before we see what the committee wants to do with this item tonight?
No.
Okay. So we have before us a request for a change of zone to straighten out and change the zoning for these 2 lots. Any comments from the committee? Any thoughts? Are you inclined to, I'm sorry? Okay. Councilor Krinsman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 2 things. One, do we need to close the public hearing? And if so, I'm happy to make a motion to close the public hearing.
Thank you. Thank you. Motion to close the public hearing. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. I believe that's unanimous. Okay, so.
Sorry, Madam Chair. And then the second thing I was going to ask was something feels a little uncomfortable to me about doing this right now, especially without fully understanding what the use or what the impact of the modified use would be. I agree with the folks who said that we shouldn't reject this. I'm not interested in rejecting this, but if there is a motion to approve, I'm going to abstain. Otherwise, I'm happy to hold this until we can maybe get some more information about just
Okay.
why this is needed or what would be done in the future.
I'm going to put that motion to hold on the table and let people speak to it. But before I do that, I'm going to go to the planning board, who I think would like to close the public hearing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do I have a motion to close the public hearing? Okay, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Yep. Thank you.
So that is unanimous as well. So, Councilor Ryan.
Yeah, on the motion to hold, I would agree with Councilor Krinsman because I want more information on this. So I think we should hold it.
Okay, can you possibly, more information on what, along the lines of what Ms. Sangiolo said or something else?
On the lines of what former Councilor Sangiolo said is to preserve maybe the multifamily housing that's there right now and look at that before we go ahead. I just think that there's more to be done on this before we bring it to a vote.
Anybody else? Councilor Leary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first impression of this zoning change was, wow, this is a poster child for why we need to do rezoning, because you have a parcel that has 3 different zones in it, and how difficult it would be for the owner to have to go through a whole special permit to do something. And I know what we're trying to make it easier for certain developments, but we also want to be more predictable about what's going to go there. I have no problem with the ward councilor's concerns and Ms. Sangiolo's concern about that really nice looking 3-family house there, which I agree we would like to keep. But I could see this parcel being, you know, a nice mixed use project as well with some housing in it. But if there are other questions that people want to, I think what people want to know more is what can we build there by right? And maybe that hasn't been clear right now. I don't mind holding the item for the reasons that have been proposed, particularly since the ward councilors are concerned about it, and this is in Ward 4. But overall, I'm in favor of making it a little easier for people to build on their properties rather than having to always go through the special permit process.
Okay, I'll just make a note that on page 4 of the planning memo, there is this matrix, and for the public as well, that shows what the MR1, MR2 manufacturing and zones allow and what the MU1 zone would allow. And their dimensional requirements only. So is what folks are asking for are what uses could be put together on that site under an MU zone? And if that's the question, I think planning could answer that. I'm sorry. I really can't hear you. I'm looking at the use table, but there's only, oh, no, I'm not looking at that. I don't have Appendix A. I do remember seeing that. Could you please review it for a moment? What's in the, oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Madam Chair, if I could, planning department produced a use table in the memorandum.
Yes, Jacqueline,
So
can you put that up?
I might-
Excuse me, just a minute. Can you put that up, please? Because it's not in my printout here.
Madam Chair?
Councilor Markowitz.
The use table that was in the planning memo, I don't think is the same one that actually shows the type of, you know, like, can you do a nursing home here? Can you have a daycare center? I believe that's in 419. I don't have it I'm not looking at it right now, but I think that's the table you're actually looking for. The other one has to do more with
I'm sorry, can you
dimensional
speak
stuff,
up?
I believe.
Oh, okay, I'm told it's not in the final memo, so maybe we at least need that. That's why I can't see it. I suppose we should have that conversation. So why don't we have a motion to hold? Are there any more comments? Geez, what is wrong with this thing? President Albright.
I don't have any problems with holding this if the only other issue is what are the uses, but this is a very awkward site for housing. I've been there, I've driven through there. It's a very awkward site, and we have lost so much commercial and manufacturing space to housing that I think if one small house goes to mixed use one, I think it's a good trade-off for the tax benefits.
Okay. Any other comments? Councilor Leary.
I do see that, you know, under most scenarios, if not all, this would still be a special permit if they were going to do anything significant there. So it's more of an exercise for us. And I do remember this building quite well because there wasn't an issue with canoes and kayaks being parked there. And it's also remember that? It was like a canoe gate thing going on. And it's also where we used to enter the trail to go on walks. I remember that property very well. It is a tight site. It is a dead end. So it could have impacts on the neighborhood. That's all I was thinking.
Another use could.
Yes, because it's very small streets going into a dead end right by the river.
But I think you're correct. If no matter what the zone is for these two parcels, it would go to a special permit because of the sheer size of what can be built on a 40,000 square foot site. Well, it's more than that.
Which also kind of makes me wonder why they're bothering with this zoning change.
Okay. I think the sentiment of the committee is to hold the item. We're going to have a discussion about potential uses, or we'll get a memo with the use table, and I'll get them. And I guess before we vote, I will hear from Attorney Morris one more time. I do want to say to the committee, we have only one more meeting next Monday before our August council meeting. So we might be polling you to come in early again to finish this up. Attorney Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to say that I am obviously quite surprised at the degree of concern expressed by certain councilors on this matter. If you look, I think the planning department did an excellent job in laying out what could be done and under either of these zones. I think it's patently clear that there's virtually everything that can be done in this zone could be done under the new zone, except for certain uses that could be done under manufacturing that will not be allowed because they would be taken out of the manufacturing zone. I'm not entirely sure what questions are going to be answered, because I don't know what questions there are that haven't already been answered by the planning department's memo, but I appreciate the opportunity to make that statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Morris. I'll just state for the record, I would be ready to vote on this tonight, but that's not entirely fair as I get heads up on this material long in advance. So we have a motion to hold on the table. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Any abstentions or nays? Thank you. I think we're done with this item. That is unanimous. I think we have 7 here tonight. Yes. I did want to recognize that some time ago, Councilor Danberg, who was at large from Ward 6 and vice chair of the committee, did sneak into the room, and we were involved. So, okay, Mr. Brown, would you like to poll your committee?
What's the pleasure of the committee?
I move we hold.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All right. Thank you.
Okay, it's unanimous. Very good. Let's go on to the item of the evening. I will first read it into the record. quickly. 3822 is a request for discussion and amendments to the zoning ordinance and zoning map regarding village center districts. I won't read the whole thing. And we always carry with that, which we're actually not tonight. We normally do carry the other item about MBTA communities, which is really just a discussion item to make sure we remain on target with satisfying that, but it's not here tonight. So at the first public hearing, and there has been only one, we heard 2.5 hours or so of testimony, and there were lots of people left over who didn't have a chance to speak. We announced our time frame and said we were going to stop at 10:15, and I'll just reiterate that the open meeting law allows us to set a time frame, but if we go beyond it, then we have to take everybody else until we finish in an evening. Between the online and in-room, there are about 35 people who had their hands up who wanted to speak, so we kept to our time. There were a number of people who were not happy with that, but as we promised, we kept the public hearing open, and we will be keeping it open again tonight into September. Tonight, we're allocating an hour and a half for the public testimony. So whenever we begin, we will stop at an hour and a half. Again, each speaker will get 3 minutes. We will be letting you know when your 3 minutes is up. I'll be calling on people in order. But important point, tonight is really meant for folks who have not yet spoken. So please, on the honor system, if you would raise your hands in the room if you would like to speak and you have not yet spoken. It's high so I can hear it. It's up or down, up or down. Okay, there we go. All right, thank you. And online, if folks could raise their electronic hands so I can see who would like to speak this evening. Only 2 folks online? Okay, we should have plenty of time then to get through the list. Thank you. Jacqueline has given me the list. I'm not sure if all of you who raised your hands are on it, but I have about 10 people here. Looks about right. So, again, the open meeting law has become, we're getting schooled in the open meeting law all the time, again, and we will not be interjecting with clarifications of any sort during your testimony. You can talk about the moon if you want for your 3 minutes, and I can't remind you that, in fact, the topic before us is village center zoning. Of course, we want to hear from people on the village center zoning. That is going to be most useful for the committee and council. So we do hope you stick to that topic. I can say it now, but I won't be interrupting anyone. We'll just go one after the other. You may speak to one another. You may take your 3 minutes to speak to one another if you choose, by agreeing or disagreeing with something somebody says. But we're not going to engage in a conversation with you during this time. If, as we did last time, there are things that are clearly misrepresented or, not part of the proposal, misunderstood, whatever, we'll keep a short list of those things and we'll go over them after the conclusion of the public testimony. We don't have to take the hour and a half, but we can take the hour and a half. Okay, enough instructions. The first person signed up to speak is Albert Ceccanelli, followed by the Reverend Cheryl Kerr. I'm sorry, could you turn your mic on, please? Is the green button lit? There's a green button. Is it lit? You have to press it. It's on the stem. There
we go.
There's excellent. Okay, please start over.
I would like to reclaim my time.
Yes, you got it. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Albert Ceccanelli, 224 Chapel Street, Newton. Thank you for hearing us. I would like to first say that I'm highly disappointed that we are just rolling over and being forced by the state to add 8,000 plus available housing units. I think it's disgusting. I think we should take action against the state. I think we should, along with other communities that are being forced to overdevelop, to step in. I'm also saddened that Newton, a relatively progressive city, has this wonderful opportunity. We're making new zoning. We're always talking about the Green New Deal, things like that, how to make the environment better. By 2035, every new car sold has to be an electric vehicle. Why are only 1/4 of the units required to have charging stations in these buildings? We need one charging station per unit for every development over 12 units. It only makes sense. What are we talking? 12 years and these buildings are going to be obsolete? We need to lead for the future. We also talk about affordable housing. We need to get away from 40B. We have an opportunity to put a 30-30 rule in for these new developments. If they want to take advantage of these new developments, 30% of the units have to be low to moderate income, and low to moderate income is figured by 30% of the median income of the community. None of this 80% like 40B or 90% like our community development rules. It needs to be real low-income housing. Again, sad to see that I, as a Republican and a conservative, see this, but the people that are here that are liberal and progressive don't. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cecchinelli. Reverend Cheryl Kerr, is that correct?
That is, thank you. Yes. Good evening, all. I'm the Reverend Cheryl Kerr, Senior Pastor at the United Parish of Auburndale and representative of NICHE, the Newton Interfaith Coalition for Housing Equity, with the purpose of reminding us all of our moral and faith imperative to do good in and for our communities, especially when it comes to housing. I also stand before you as a new resident of Auburndale Village, mother of 3 teenagers, go Lions, mortgage holder, community stakeholder, and one whose vocation is in and for the community in which I live. All 4 major world religions have a single mandate in common. In the Christian scripture, it can be found in all 3 synoptic gospels and reads, "You shall love your God with your whole self, and you shall love your neighbor as you love yourself." Judaism, Hinduism, and Islam all have similar commandments. More often, however, our neighbors are being priced out of Newton due to rising housing costs, rising demand for more housing, which we don't have, and community costs that can't meet needs because of lack of revenue, in part due to insufficient housing. As stated by my colleagues and peers in prior sessions, the greatest loss when housing is inadequate and undersupplied falls always on the less fortunate, and disproportionately on people of color. Newton has a history of discrimination via redlining and displacement of Black and brown people. More recently, though, Newton has begun to prioritize inclusion and do the work that celebrates diversity by making efforts to be more welcoming, more inclusive. We continue to learn as a community how we can do and be better. As a member of the Newton clergy and a representative of people of faith, I ask you, does this zoning reform call us in the name of justice to love our neighbor as we love ourselves? Additionally, I stand before you as a resident, a mother with children in the school system, and the struggling owner of a mortgage that we can barely afford. 2 years ago, my husband and I signed that mortgage, though, because living in the city of Newton has exceptional benefits that affect not just myself and my family through an exceptional school system and services, but also my congregation and the community of Auburndale Village. You see, we talk a lot about our pastors and our teachers, nurses, and first responders, and the negative effect it has on both of them and this city when they cannot afford to live within the city they serve. Well, I'm one of these people, and because we were able to secure a home just 3 blocks away from my church, I attest to the fact that I can be there for my people and my neighbors in love and compassion, just as my faith calls me to be. I thank you for this opportunity, and I just want to say that I approve of the work that's being done on behalf of Niche for the sake of zoning and all the work that's being done to increase housing and in that increase affordable housing as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend. Next, Marcia Johnson, followed by Ari Zarin. Mr. Zarin, oh, excuse me. Mr. Zarin, did you speak last time?
Yes, I'll be brief.
I can't take you next, though. I'm going to have to go through the folks who haven't spoken and then come back to you. Please go ahead.
Good evening. Marcia Johnson, 845 Washington Street, Newtonville. For the June 26th public hearing, I sent a letter on behalf of the League of Women Voters, Newton's 2022-23 Board of Directors, in support of the zoning ordinance regarding village centers and the implementation of the Massachusetts Housing Choice Bill. However, it is also important that our support be read into the Council's record. The LWVN achieves the goal of educating and informing citizens by engaging them through public conversations on timely, important issues. We do this through our League Present series and with topic meetings. Therefore, it was important to participate in the city's extensive community engagement process. It began with our September 2021 zoning redesign virtual forum and ended with our year-end observer report of the Zoning and Planning Committee in May. As a result of our efforts and observations, it is our understanding that the VCOD is structured to promote safe and secure housing at a range of price points, while incentivizing increasing supply of smaller units, retaining our Z ordinance requirements, and in addition, provides a density bonus to encourage greater affordability. It most clearly concentrates the opportunity for compact development near transit and where key infrastructure exists, building upon Newton's unique existing patterns of development. This provides customers to support our local economy with minimal increase in car trips by supporting walkable centers. It is also part of a regional plan to address the critical housing shortage by increasing supply statewide. The League of Women Voters has taken multiple positions that enable us to advocate for these changes in Newton zoning. Here are just a few. Create and maintaining a full spectrum of housing types to reflect and enhance the diversity of Newton's population and neighborhoods. Retaining and creating businesses that contribute to the vitality of the community, along with housing designed to meet human needs and built with amenities that encourage economic integration. Regional and metropolitan planning should be promoted to prevent haphazard urban growth, and housing for low and moderate income families should be provided. As a result of our almost 2-year education process, and with the League's local, state, and national positions, we are certain that the League of Women Voters of Newton is in a strong position to advocate for the adoption and implementation of the Village Center Overlay District Ordinance and MBTA Communities Act. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I have next Sasha Fine, followed by Wasan Rafat.
Hi everybody, my name is Sasha Fine. I just graduated from Newton South High School, and although I'm moving away in the fall, I still wanted to show up tonight because this is a young people's issue, and young people like me and my friends, we care. City councilors, you're voting on my future in the city I grew up in, and my future on this planet. Building multifamily homes in Newton near public transit would reduce cars and their carbon emission. Multifamily homes are energy efficient, and multifamily homes are inherent community builders. I spent the first 8 years of my life living in a condo in Jamaica Plain. Our housemates had a son my age, and some of my favorite childhood memories are playing with him in our shared front yard or our joint family dinners. Although we no longer share a driveway, we still enjoy spending time together. To be honest, I'm sick of excuses. I'm sick of not in my backyards and maybe laters and not our problems. I'm sick of watching those with power take away mine. Our villages don't need to be saved, but they can be bonded. They can be walkable, they can be climate friendly, diverse, and they can be achievable. That's the Newton I want to move back to. Only with multi-family homes can we make this possible. Please consider voting yes, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Wasan Rafat, is that correct?
Hello, my name is Wasan Rafat, and I recently graduated from Newton South High School. I'm speaking today in support of swift and decisive measures to protect our climate and community. Growing up, we as kids are always told to do the right thing, even if it's scary and even if it's difficult. Building multi-family homes in Newton is the right thing to do. Taking this step would significantly reduce energy consumption and carbon emissions. And as someone who has lived in multi-family homes for much of my life, I can personally attest to the profound educational and economic opportunities that it offers to families. So let us create a more equitable future for our community, a future for people my age, for my younger siblings and their peers, a legacy that you can take pride in leaving behind. Let us unite in our commitments to combat climate change and ensure diversity in our community, because only through collective efforts can we forge meaningful change and pave the way for a more resilient and sustainable society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to go online to mix it up a little bit. We have, I'll take the first, well, there's only 4 people. I'll take Diane Pruente, followed by Raina Getz.
Hi, I'm Diane Pruente. I live at 305 Winchester Street. I feel that the Village Center zoning plan should be put on hold for several reasons. These plans were started before the state mandated MBTA Communities Act was passed, requiring Newton to zone for 8,300 additional housing units. We also have a few thousand units that are currently being built, approved to be built, or are undergoing the approval process. This adds up to a 33% increase. Prudent planning suggests that no additional zoning changes be made until the state mandated planning is in place for a few years, and we have time to see the results of all the current and planned construction. We don't want to overbuild. The Village Center zoning was started before the COVID pandemic. Many people work from home now and may not feel the need to live so close to Boston. The Village Center zoning does not adequately address global warming. People all over the world are suffering from floods, heat, and fires right now. Although what Newton does or does not do will have a very small impact on the environment, it will have an impact. It is our responsibility to do whatever we can to reduce our impact on the environment. The proposed zoning does not go far enough to protect the environment. It will create heat islands. In some places, trees will be taken down, which if replaced will take many years to grow to maturity. We already have flooding in Newton. It will be worse with the new construction we are proposing. The taxes we collect from the increased population from the state zoning will not cover our expenses, such as additional city employees for fire, police, school employees, such as teachers, administrators, aides, special ed teachers, nurses, counselors, etc. The increased population from Village Center zoning will only exacerbate this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Parente. Raina Getz.
Good evening, counselors, city staff, and fellow residents. My name is Raina Getz, and I've resided with my family on Pine Ridge Road in the village of Woburn for nearly 30 years now. I have 3 points. The first one is these 2 proposals before our community, the Village Center rezoning and compliance with Section 3A of the Mass General Laws, Chapter 48, often referred to as 3A, need to be disassociated and formulated as two distinct plans for the overall betterment of each of the considerations. Yes, the two proposals are interrelated, overlapping potential localizations, but as spoken many times by the planning department staff, the first priority is to get the village center rezoning right for the long-term health and viability of the city of Newton at this stage, and at this stage, it is not. Here in Woburn, 85% of the total number of rezoned lots in the Village Center Overlay District proposal are outside of Woburn Village Center proper. The initial Village Center rezoning proposal has shifted from a Village Center rezoning proposal and subsumed into the rezoning proposal to bring the city of Newton into 3A compliance. How and where the city is to rezone within the city is a choice, and we as a community would benefit immensely with more robust and intentional community engagement and outreach, such as the community informational meetings held throughout the rezoned areas of the cities, as was done with prior iterations of zoning reform. Let it be known, as a resident whose parcel has been upzoned, I have been noticed only once by the city about the zoning proposal with a postcard on November 17th, 2022. Since then, we have not received any additional notifications of updates or revisions. My hope and expectation are that the city would be in a vigorous phase of public engagement, especially with property owners of rezoned parcels and their abutters. Yes, there is a group of self-selecting residents, count me in that pool, that have chosen to be informed, but the majority of Newton residents are not aware of these zoning proposals, and I believe it is incumbent on elected officials and our government to educate and to solicit opinions from residents before the final formulation of both proposals and the final city council votes. Infill development, point number 3, and redevelopment works best when it is respectful of and works with existing context. We have buildings surviving in their original construct from the era of river mill villages, the 1660s, railroad villages from 1840 to 1870, and to early 19th century railroad suburbs. Newton is incredibly fortunate to have some of the built environment left from those eras to teach us our history. What are we doing to value those historic resources? And as this generation stewards, to pass them on to the next generations of Newtonians. Most of our iconic Village Center buildings do not have in place the historic preservation protections that they merit.
Thank
As
you,
I have
Ms.
mentioned
Getz.
before, yeah.
You're over 3 minutes. Can
Okay, let me
you can
just
you
finish this
submit your
sentence.
comments to us?
Yep.
All right.
I will do that.
Thanks very much. I'm going to go to Daniel Herring next.
Hi, my name is Daniel Herring. I live at 77 Oakdale Road. Most of my neighbors have no idea about the zoning proposal, even that there is such a concept. And so I agree with what was said earlier. The city really needs to do a much better job of informing the public of what's going on. And actually getting strong participation. This will change the shape of our community. Personally, I'm all for affordable housing. Newton is very expensive. I won't go into those, but and I support multifamily housing. However, these need to be done smart. I don't want to end up with the poor parts of town where we segregate affordable housing away from other sectors of town. And so I have some concerns about that aspect of where things are placed. I chose to live in Newton because it was not Brookline or Cambridge or Silicon Valley. The concept of having six-story or five-story buildings in my village center, that's not what I was looking for. That's not what most of my neighbors were looking for. I have concerns that many of the existing small businesses will be forced to close as property values go up and new construction, multinational or large corporations move in. I have great concerns about putting a lot of multifamily housing directly on Route 9. I think Route 9 really should be a limited access road. We have a lot of safety and traffic issues, stoplights and other construction that's happening is exacerbating the issue. I think it would be a very poor planning decision to put more traffic on that road. Basically, I like the idea of making Newton more affordable. I just don't think this is the right way to go about it. And I would very much appreciate the opportunity to participate in a planning process to come up with a better design. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to go back in the room to Kia Freeman. And don't worry, I'm seeing the additional hands up online. Kia Freeman, and then followed by Irina Teslia.
Hello, my name is Kaya Freeman, and I live in Newton Center on Beacon Street near Center Street. It appears to me that the upzoning of Newton Center is based on the theory that the existing Newton Center infrastructure can support a lot of additional units. My observation as a longtime resident in Newton Center most of the time is that the existing infrastructure is struggling to support the existing units. Although I think there are many problems, including local school capacity, I'll only discuss one problem that I see, which is traffic. Substantial vehicular traffic backups are already the norm at peak travel times in Newton Center. For example, when I want to leave my property and go east during peak traffic, I normally have to block traffic and cut into a very long traffic queue. Obviously, that's a little dangerous, and I would prefer not to have to do that. Secondly, vehicles often have to wait through more than one traffic signal cycle to get through an intersection in Newton Center. As someone who's worked in traffic engineering, that is considered a fail level of service. There seems to be this theory that pedestrian traffic will not affect vehicular traffic. That is not the case. Increased pedestrian traffic created by proposed additional units will increase existing backups. Pedestrian traffic often interferes with vehicular traffic. There's only so many people or vehicles that can get through an intersection at one time. So additional pedestrian traffic will increase the length of backups and slow the flow of traffic through Newton Center. As everyone knows, standing traffic creates local pollution, and I, for one, don't think that anyone in Newton Center should have to deal with any increased local pollution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Irina Tesliar?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
My name is Irina Tesliar. Can you hear?
Could you bring the mic a little forward and start again?
Okay. My name is Irina Tesliar. I live in Oak Hill Park since 1994. I work for a financial company with offices in downtown Boston, using public transportation to commute to work. So I have 30 years of firsthand experience with Boston public transportation system and being a resident in Newton. I think you're trying to have more people like me who live in Newton and commuting. I want to start with saying thank you to committee that worked on trying to find a compromise solution on how to satisfy MBTA Massachusetts requirements and still try to keep Newton livable and enjoyable to its residents. I'm surprised cities, not just Newton, cities are not trying to fight in court legitimacy of MBTA requirements to increase density of population around transportation hubs. I'm not saying we need to continue to live as we lived for 30 years. Matters are changing, what we expect are changing. but I also don't think that the government should be allowed to force people to change their life because of what exactly? It's not that we're getting new commuter rail stations built and we're asking for that. This is an existing public transportation system. At the time it was constructed, I guess the research was done and was determined that it's worth building it. So I am not a lawyer, but I am kind of questioning, is it allowed for the government to impose on citizens? Let me continue on what I wrote. Previous meetings, we listened to recommendations for zoning changes and projected impact on Newton city dynamics. Proposed zoning changes will add over 8,000 new apartments to city real estate pool. Many presenters at the last meeting referred to these apartments as affordable. I haven't heard anyone saying what's the definition of affordable. 1,700,000 per apartment? What is the definition of affordable rent? As a city, we cannot dictate prices, right? The zoning regulation is not going to say for how much you're allowed to sell or rent. So I do not think we can assume that apartments will be low cost. We have multi-apartment buildings around the corner. Apartment building built on Route 1 next to Home Depot. Plenty of apartment buildings built in Needham, right, off Kendrick Street. I don't know if you ever checked, but the one-bedroom apartment is substantially upwards of $3,000 a month to rent. So when we saying that these buildings, this additional...
Ms. Tesliar, you're over 3 minutes.
I'm sorry.
Would you be able to submit your comments to us?
Yes, I will.
Thank you very much. Mary Lee Belleville, you are in the room. Please come forward.
My name is Mary Lee Belleville. I live at 136 Warren Street.
I'm going to stop you for just a second. Could you get a little closer to the mic?
I'll move it closer.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Better?
Start over. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. My name is Mary Lee Belleville. I live at 136 Warren Street in Newton Center. I've been very engaged in the rezoning conversations, and I have a lot of concerns, but tonight I really want to focus on my biggest concern, and that's what I perceive to be the detrimental impact that it's going to have on our existing village center businesses, especially the small businesses. At a recent Newton area council meeting, Chair Crossley said that the city was undertaking this for the sake of our villages, which require more feet on the street in order to stabilize our local economies, which are withering across the city. I don't agree with that. At the June 26th public hearing, Ms. Cairo said that the city was undertaking the village center zoning to ensure the long-term health, vitality, and increased vibrancy of our village centers. But she also pointed out that our village centers couldn't be built under our existing zoning. But they are built, they exist, and contrary to the city's narrative, many businesses are thriving. Newton Center, which I walk through at least a couple times a day, has never been more lively. It has become a dining destination for both those of us who walk there, as well as the many people who drive. And let's face it, people will drive. There are very few open storefront businesses in Newton Center, and a number of new businesses have recently opened up in the last few months. Why would we want to see all of these thriving and beloved businesses be displaced with buildings and buildings torn down? Because that's what's going to happen, because the developers can't and won't build above these buildings. They have to be torn down. They'll knock them down, and that potentially would include all of the historic buildings that are part of the beloved Piccadilly Square, because there's no protection beyond an 18-month demo delay. None of us have a crystal ball, but it's just logical that this is going to be the first place where we're going to see the impact with this zoning. Our businesses will be sacrificial lambs in order to build taller and taller buildings on the promise of housing. If I had any confidence that the majority of the housing that would be built would be truly affordable, I could get on board. But this isn't going to happen. Even with the affordability bonus of an additional story over the buildings that will already be too tall, we would only be getting a marginal increase in affordable units. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Belleville, right on time. Okay, I see a few more people have put their hands up online. I think the last person in the room is Mr. Zarin. Is there anyone else in the room that really wants, not to speak again, but to speak for the first time? Okay, I think you, okay, oh, the fellow at the end of the room. Okay, please, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Could you please come forward?
Good evening. My name is Gerard Slattery. I live at 143 Bridge Street, Newton, Mass. And I'm also speaking on behalf of Patrick Slattery. And if it's possible, I don't know if you could bring up the maps because he owns several properties, and otherwise maybe you have the packets here, you can just follow along. But Patrick Slattery is the owner of 137 Bridge Street, 139 Bridge Street, 141 Bridge Street, 143 Bridge Street, all in the Nonantum Village Center zone. He is also the owner of 221 and 227 Walnut Street in the Newtonville Village Center zone. He also owns 5 Peabody Street in Newton Corner in the Village Center zone. He also owns 2224 John Street in Thompsonville in the Village Center zone, and 92 Langley Road in Newton Center in the Village Center zone, and 125 Neshobe Road in Waubun, which is outside of the Village Center zone, but we had questions regarding that as well. I have a letter of his comments, and I just wanted to submit that to the record as well, but I'll try to get through as much as I can right now. With regard to the properties on Bridge Street, they're the only properties that are not included in the VC2. It's the only properties that are MRT. We wondered why that is, and why aren't all the other properties on the block we are and the block north of us that are between manufacturing, why aren't they upzoned higher than MRT? Most of the properties aren't in that, north of that also aren't upzoned at all, and that's a bigger question that I have for a lot of the village centers is within these village center zones, there's a lot of properties that aren't changing their zoning at all. If it's essential, and I believe that this committee says that it is essential that this upzoning happen, shouldn't every parcel that falls within a village center be upzoned, at least to MRT? And then with regard to 92 Langley Road, 92 Langley Road is going to be proposed to be upzoned to MRT, but it is within 500 feet of the Newton Center T-stop. I mean, it fits the ultimate ideal of, I think, what this committee is trying to do, but everything on the south side of the T-stop is just MRT, and not all those properties are even within the upzone at all. And then there's also the apartment buildings on Paul Street, which are still only zoned to MRT. And that also falls in for Patrick Slattery's property at 2224 John Street. Right now, all the properties on John Street that are zoned to MRT, which 2224 John Street is, they're going to be trapped in a vise of VC3 at the end of the street in Route 9, and then VC2, and then all the other houses, which several of which are multifamily, like 2224 John Street, they're going to be trapped in a vise of VC3.
Sir, could you stick around for our comments after the public hearing is ended? And everyone else too, please. There's a number of things we want to clarify, but like I said, I can't interject until all the speakers are finished for the evening.
I have several copies of the letter that's a little bit more extensive than what I was able to say here. I'd like to add it to the
And
record.
again, and if it's really helpful if you can send it online. If you can't, we.
I can do that as well. Oh, sorry. What's the email I should send it to?
I'll see if
Okay,
Stanford
I'll wait.
can help you out. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Oh,
If you could step away from the podium, however, yeah. Sir, if you could step away from the podium so the next speaker can come up. Thank you. Mr. Zarin.
I recognize that I've already spoken. My name is Ari Zarin. I live in Newton Highlands, so I'll try to keep this relatively brief. I just want to reiterate my support for the current zoning proposal and that I hope that it certainly isn't reduced during committee hearings before it's brought to the full city council in September, I believe is when it's being brought to the city council. I also just want to add and to speak to the councilors and address to some of my fellow community members that this zoning and planning proposal cannot be the final step when it comes to thinking about how to revitalize Newton as a city in the whole over the next 5, 10, 20 years, whatever you want to say. I think that people have brought up concerns about traffic and people have brought up concerns about a couple other things. But, you know, this proposal is just one of several steps that the city needs to take in order to get to a city that is more sustainable environmentally and that has better living conditions for the people who live in it. I understand that there's a bike map proposal, bike map, I'm not sure exactly what's happening, but there's a bike process being gone through right now that's kind of similar to the zoning process in some ways. And I think I would strongly encourage the council to think of this zoning proposal as step one in a longer process of making sure we can think about things like how do we increase the capacity of the city for sustainable transportation, whether that's electric cars, but I also strongly encourage biking and walking, which are two things that I do when I bike to the village centers and I bike to the T-stop to take it into Boston. But all of those things are kind of restricted by the current car infrastructure in certain ways. We don't have great bike paths. We don't even have great bike lanes in a lot of areas of the city. So I just want to finally reiterate my support for making a vibrant community, and I think that's going to be done by not just one zoning and planning proposal, but by a series of proposals that gets the city each step of the way there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zarin. I have 2 more hands online. If there's anybody else online who thinks they want to speak this evening, now is the time to put your hand up. So I'm first going to call on Doris Ann Sweet, followed by Sachiko Ishihara.
Hi, my name is Doris Ann Sweet, and I live at 281 Lexington Street in Auburndale. And I have to say that I'm so happy to hear our young people speaking up, because when we're talking about zoning, we know it takes a long time to be implemented and actually for housing to occur after zoning is put in place, and they are the ones who will be around and will be affected by it. So anyway, I think that's great. I think that in my view, what we have are 2 crises going on at the same time. And one is a housing shortage, and that's in Newton, but also in other parts of the country, maybe all of the country. And we have climate change, and that's around the world. So I think that the zoning plan that we have before us is addressing, as well as it is possible at this point, both of these by making it easier to build multifamily housing and to convert large old Victorians or just large houses into as many as 4 housing units, and locating more housing near transit just makes so much sense for the climate, especially if people don't have to drive, then they're not, their cars are not polluting. And that's all to the better. So basically, I'm full-throated in favor of where this zoning proposal is planning to take us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sweet. Next is Sachiko Ishihara. Hello.
Hi, thank you. Dear members of the City Council and city planning officials, I live at 15 Davis Street, and I am following the last public hearing in June. President Susan Albright recommended that the public comment on specific aspects of the large village zoning reform. It's a large document. And so I am actually coming here as a personal appeal. I do believe that we need more housing. I believe in keeping Newton vibrant. I have worked in Newton for over 25 years. I've only lived here for 18. And 4 years ago, I was fortunate enough to purchase a house. And so I am one of 3 family houses that are zoned business in the heart of West Newton Square. And so I believe we have a rather unique situation where we have residential houses in a business district that has no setback on the 1-story Washington Street shops that are right there in West Newton Square, which includes the West Newton Cinema, which is, of course, 2.5 stories currently. So here is my request, is that we specifically redesignate this one block as a VC2. I do believe change needs to happen, as that we need multifamily housing. I'm just asking for gradual change. Going to a VC2, I think we would not object to it, my fellow residents and myself. And I think that over time, VC3 may be totally possible on that block. I'm just asking for this consideration that there is no setback requirement. So we are going from backing up our houses and our properties to a 1-story business district to now considering 4.5 stories. And this is just, it's a threat to our homes. It's difficult to face the fact that planning has decided that our houses can go, that we could be demolished and new houses, multi-family housing could be replacing our homes. And I live on a street where I love being in the village center. I love what I do here in Newton. And I'm just requesting that the VC2 be considered for this one parcel of area that's bordered by Highland Street, Chestnut Street, Davis Street, and Washington Street. I want to see that Newton stays vibrant, and I just make this request as a specific situation in the heart of Newton. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I don't see any other hands. Oh, maybe I do. I see one more online. Carol, would you like to come forward and please state your full name?
Yes, my name is Carol Carroll. I live in Newton Highlands, and I just want to speak up for careful editing of what's been presented for zoning, because there are many places where things are a little slipshod, I hate to say, so I don't know if it's the consultants or where we are, but I will send a document that will explain what I'm concerned about, but editing, this is not a testimonial, it's a request for closer editing of things that are on the map, that are in the zoning document. Thank you.
Thank you, point taken. Anyone else? Okay, gotta take a closer look over here. I think that's it. I think for the evening, we're not gonna use our 1.5 hours for public testimony. I'd like a motion to hold from President Albright to hold the public hearing open. All those in favor of holding the public hearing open, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays or abstentions? Thank you. So, yes. Oh, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the Planning Board, can I have a motion to hold this Village Center item and we can resume our deliberations at our August 7th meeting? All right. Second, all right. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Yeah. Thanks. And
Okay, there we go. All set? All right. Okay, so just to be clear, we did this last time, and the law office, who's here tonight in the person of Andrew Lee, as I mentioned earlier, has said that once the public has concluded its testimony, we may, at that point in our deliberations, or proceed our deliberations, if any, with clarifications. This is not to take issue with anyone's comments, but simply to correct for everyone certain things for the record or inform. So I might give my list to Mr. Lamel in a second, but I did want to say a couple things. One is, there was a comment about EV charging and why aren't we including more in requiring more. We actually would like to do that, but as of January of this year, there's a new mass building code, which includes a very detailed and stringent mass energy code, and the requirements are embedded within the Massachusetts code. We, as a municipality, are not allowed to require more than what the code requires. So until the code is further changed or the market pushes new development to require more EV charging stations, we can't affect that at the moment any further. So there was another definitions of affordable housing. When we have something called an inclusionary ordinance in the city of Newton that will apply to this district also. We went over this last time as well, but I think the room had pretty much emptied by 11:15.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
When you're done with your clarifications, are you going to take clarifications from the other committee members and other counselors?
We certainly can.
All right.
We certainly can.
I would respectfully suggest, when I've chaired a committee, I've never done clarifications like this, and I really think we'd be better served by just proceeding to discussion rather than the chair correct people.
I have been advised by law that this is a fine procedure and we can only stick to the facts.
But
So
Madam
if you
Chair,
would
when-
rather have Mr. Lamel do it than me, you know, I'm not sure why, but I could do that.
You know, Madam Chair, I think that's, frankly, I'm going to go on the record, I think this is inappropriate. Thank you.
I disagree. Thank you. So somebody wanted a definition of affordable housing, what constitutes an affordable housing unit. The inclusionary zoning ordinance, which again will apply to the VCOD, requires a certain minimum percentage of deed-restricted units affordable to folks earning an average area median income of 65%, but between 50 and 80%. More units depending on the size of the project, and those folks can't be spending any more than 30% of their income on housing. So it's a bit more complicated than that, but that's the essence of it. And I'm going to let Mr. Lamel speak to the engagement period and how many notices went out and so forth.
Sure. So just a couple points of clarification. This Village Center effort was kicked off by the City Council after COVID in 2021, or I guess in the throes of COVID. So it's been going on for a little over 2 years now. The outreach and engagement effort has been fairly extensive. I'm happy to share the resources online that document that after the fact or in the next Friday packet. 2 notices were sent out, one for version 1, physical notices that were mailed to property owners, just property owners within the proposed zones in November of 2022, and notices were sent out in June, about a month ago, in advance of the June 26th public hearing to all property owners in the proposed districts, abutters, and abutters of those abutters. Do you want me to? I think, yeah. Happy to talk about that.
That's good enough for now. So we have a little time before, we have another item that's going to, just a minute, we have another item that's going to interrupt this session. Excuse me. There is one more thing I wanted to say to the public. So we have received and are continuing to receive specific requests sorry, for changes of zone on the map. We've received quite a few. There were a couple of people here tonight who spoke to a desire to change. If we could have those sent to us in writing, the planning department will talk to you. Sorry, I might be losing my voice. But I'm going to stop talking in a quick second. So we really do want to hear from you. It's going to be helpful, especially when it's a complex matter, but even if it's a fairly simple matter, for us to know exactly what property it is. And we will be discussing, we will be moving through the text. Somebody said, let's be careful about editing, or there's a huge amount of that still to do. We're starting to move through the text next meeting and probably into the August meeting. And we hope in the August meeting we're going to begin to entertain, we're going to review the maps, and we will take up any proposed map changes and have that discussion as well. So with that, do I have any comments from the committee? I think we could go to 7:30 before we take up the, 8:30 before we take up the next item. Councillor Bright and then Laredo.
I was wondering when I would be able to present the few slides that I gave to the City Council today.
I didn't see any slides. You sent it to the City Council?
Yes.
Okay.
And
did anyone get these?
Yeah.
So, okay, this isn't. We're going to have a conversation about process, but let me say this. At the end of our last public hearing, we had about a half an hour or less discussion and deliberation. And Councillor Wright, you maintained that you had another idea for how to proceed with the VCOD and solve MBTA communities. The committee asked you to please write this up and explain to them in advance, you know, what it is you were talking about, basically. It was not clear that evening. Several people spoke. So I contacted you after that. We had a discussion, and I want to make sure folks hear this, because if there's a dramatic proposal for change beyond, and again, I talked to Law about this, and I urged you to speak to Law, which has not happened, but I would really like you to do that, because if your proposal goes beyond the scope of the docket item as it's been advertised for the public hearing, may need a new docket item.
It does not. It does not go beyond what is
okay. When you spoke with me, it sounded like it did.
I modified this so I stayed all within the parameters. Basically, Councillor
that's fine.
John Oliver and I put together a database where you can, and we calculated the total amount of upzoning and things that we can change, and where we can meet the MBTA Act and also
that's
the
fine. We don't need to hear the particulars today, so I wrote back to you today exactly what we could do, since it was just today. You sent me something you sent me something Saturday afternoon. When could you be on the agenda? But you hadn't gotten back to me, and there hadn't been anything sent to the council. So we had set our agenda tonight to talk after the public hearing a little bit and to, after the next item, to talk about the process we want to use for going through the text and maps over the next couple of meetings. As I told you, amendments are in order, throughout that process starting next week.
I will have 1,000 amendments then, if we go that way.
Well, you told me 500, so I'm sorry, you can't have 1,000. Well,
So going over, so it's basically explaining the database and how you can manipulate the database to get what you need.
Councilor Wright, I don't think it's fair to the committee to start talking about something we haven't been able to look at, especially if it's this much of a departure from what it is we're doing.
It isn't, I don't think so.
So what I said to you is that it would be in order next week. If anyone on the committee disagrees with that, Councilor Leary and then Danberg.
Madam Chair, I'm not disagreeing in terms of having Councilor Wright bring forward. What I'm just seeing now is 21 pages of somewhat pretty technical and detailed information. And I know there's many members here, including Councilor Laredo, who get kind of upset when we get material that we haven't had a weekend to go through, or at least a day or two. I want to hear what she has to say, but I don't want to hear it tonight because I want to be able to look at this, and I'd like to have a large chunk of our meeting dedicated to your proposal.
I see you. Councilor Danberg? Councilor
Just
Danberg
going
was
to-
next.
Of course, and I was just going to respond to Councilor Leary's comment about me.
No, I'm sorry, but let's go in order here. Councilor Danberg.
Thank you. And thank you, Councilor Leary, for saying what you did, because that was pretty much what I was going to say. I noticed that this proposal did not come in until 4:23 this afternoon, and I, for one, did not have a chance to take a look at it. It is 21 pages long with very lots of detail in it, and so I would also like to hear what Councilor Wright has to say, but tonight I do not consider an appropriate time to do this because we have not had a chance to look at it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Miss Councilor Laredo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I fully agree with my colleague from Ward 1. We should have an opportunity to review materials in advance. But here's the problem, Chair Crosley and President Albright. Whenever a councilor has tried to provide information to the full council in advance of a meeting, we've been told we cannot do that because it violates the open meeting law, even if we post it simultaneously. I know Councilor Wright and I have both posed questions to the planning department online in advance of meetings so we could anticipate a discussion. Councilor Wright, I presume, didn't do that here precisely because she's been stymied. You may shake your head, Councilor Crosley, but she has been stymied by the chair in her ability to present materials.
No.
I have, Councilor Crosley, I can assure you of that. So I will second Councilor Leary's suggestion that we not take it up this evening. I think she is quite right. We need an opportunity to understand materials, to review materials, to create questions about materials. That's good practice. But it's not good practice to shut down the ability of councilors.
You know what, Councilor Laredo? I've just about had it. I reached out to Councilor Wright, as she knows, right after the public hearing. I got no response. I reached out again with a letter, a memo to the staff and her and the vice chair to be very clear about what it was we needed, and the committee had asked for subsequent to the public hearing, which you were not in the room for, so maybe you did not hear this. We have been asking for this material, and I offered her time on tonight's agenda as long as we got the material in advance. It is a violation of the open meeting law to send what she sent to the city council at 4:21 or so p.m. today. Now, that material, I'm sorry, that material may go into the packet and we can put some time on the agenda for it. It would have been better this evening, but because we have a lot of work to do and a lot of very specific text review and editing and amendments that people are prepared to put forward, and some have put them forward. I begged the committee to put their amendments forward in advance. That did not happen. Now, I'm sure it was a lot of work and you just weren't ready, but it didn't happen. And I have made time on the agenda, and I will make time on the agenda, and if it means we have to have an extra meeting, we'll have an extra meeting. But please do not assume that I have been standing in the way of Ms. Wright's ideas.
So I want to just get clarification from the chair then. So next time, any one of us has questions for staff, we can include it in the packet and it will be posted. Is that right?
No, not necessarily. Those questions.
So how can we prepare in advance if we can't do that, Madam Chair? That's the problem
This was
Councilor Wright
specifically
has.
requested, and I am still not sure that it doesn't require a second docket item because I haven't seen anything and it hasn't been
It
shared
does
with
not
me.
require a second
That's
docket
fine.
item.
That's fine.
Point of order, Madam Chair?
Yes.
I was wondering if this conversation could be kept offline or in another forum while we're
Yes.
still.
Thank you so much, Councilor
And
Larry, and
I just want to say, I think exactly right, Councilor Wright, there was a lot of work that went into here, and she just wasn't ready to put it into the Friday packet. And I know that we will have a time to look at it, and I do not believe that the Chair of Zoning and Planning is trying to stymie any counselors. And I certainly, this is the first I've heard it. And I have a lot of confidence in her leadership, as well as the leadership of other counselors here who have spoken and who I respect.
I think I had, let's see, I think I had Councilor Oliver and then Albright and then Wright and then Danberg.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess in the interest of lowered voices, I'm trying to understand when.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. All I'm hearing is me. Sorry. Is that better? When or how are we meant to comply with open meeting law and submitting of questions? I don't want to start a debate. I don't want to inflame anyone else.
The questions
I just
are
don't
another matter.
understand it.
So people submit questions which have a lot of opinion in them, and that has happened. Perhaps President Albright can speak to that when it's her turn. This was a proposal that was alleged to be completed, and so the committee asked Councilor Wright, and it's essentially an amendment to the, I guess, it's a one giant amendment to the VCOD, and we asked her to present it. It does not have, I assume, yes? I'm sorry, is that Councilor, Attorney Lee? No. So I'm not going to deal with the question and answer stuff. There's a lot of questions that get submitted that would be really simple to ask the planning department and review with if you're having trouble understanding something. And there's a Q&A the planning department has put together that culls the key points, or is intended to. If there's something missing from that, we can add to it. But I'm not going to address, I'm not an open meeting law expert. I am told what we can do here.
So submitting of questions perhaps that are,
You can submit questions to the planning department anytime you like. They don't have to go to the whole council.
fair enough, but when the questions are leading to information that will be discussed, how would that information be
You bring it up at the
surfaced?
meeting.
So when a list of 20 questions is submitted, answers provided, which doesn't always happen, but when those answers are provided, are they read into the record? Is that the intent? And I'm not trying to be snarky. I sound snarky to myself, but I'm trying to understand how this is supposed to happen.
We have taken up many of the questions people have had in the meeting. Sometimes folks don't like the answer and they keep asking the question, or sometimes maybe it's not understood, or when we discuss that point, other people are not in the room with us. You know, I can't, you know, if the questions come from outside the committee. I don't think the committee feels generally, except for Ms. Wright perhaps, that we have not covered people's concerns and questions all along the way.
I might not be part of the committee, but as part of the council, I agree with Councilor Wright. We are still looking for complete answers, some of which Councilor Wright and I have, to your point, and to my fellow Ward 1 councilor's point earlier, took a lot of work to get there. There's still some that we have to do. I find it concerning that this is the conversation. We could have already spun through the 21 slides. We could have done that by now. We could have done that by now. We should have done that by now.
It's 21 pages, and the council, the committee said no. So that's where we're leaving it, and we are beginning our deliberations on the text and maps next meeting. President Albright, and then Councilor Danberg.
So in answer...
Oh, I'm sorry, then Councilor Wright, sorry.
There was, last week, the MMA ran another webinar on the open meeting law, which I had the opportunity to be a little bit part of. And they made it clear in that meeting that it is violation of the open meeting law for one counselor to email all the other counselors with an opinion. They didn't say it's fine, but just cure it by putting a memo in the Friday packet. They said it is not, it is a violation of the open meeting law. So that's what was said in the MMA, that on the MMA working webinar last week. With respect to, I had the opportunity to see some of Councilor Wright's questions over the weekend. And I have to say that some of them were indeed questions and could have been clarified by sitting down with the planning department. However, there was a large number of the questions which were change that code, change that code, change that code, fix this code. Those are not questions. Those are the kinds of things that we bring to the meeting and we discuss as a committee. You can't tell the planning department to change the code without having a discussion in committee. So that's part of the problem, and I understood the problem a little bit better after having the opportunity to see that information. And as a matter of policy, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but if something comes into the committee at 4 o'clock on the day of the meeting, it should not be added to the Friday packet, which is the Friday packet. The Friday packet should contain information that came in on Friday. And I don't understand why that was even added to the Friday packet. I don't know if it was your decision, that Carol Moore's decision, whose decision, but that was the wrong decision.
Well, that discussion has to be had in the clerk's office.
We should have that discussion. Yep. We should have a policy. But things that come to us on Friday are fair game to be discussed. And when things come to us late from the staff, we usually have that discussion. Should we accept it or not? And we vote on it. But this was not information from the staff. So I don't know why we're even having this discussion tonight. Yeah. The chair has an agenda. We need to follow the agenda, and we will get, I believe the offer has been made to have the discussion of Councilor Wright's amendments at the next meeting. So I don't know why we're arguing about that right now.
Which is what I wrote to her this morning. So Councilor Danberg, and then back to, I'm sorry, I keep going out of order. Councilor Wright, then Danberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You did originally say that I needed to write it up. I had a slightly different plan in consultation with another counselor. I kind of pivot to keep it all within the docket items. And I did review it with one or two other people, and they said, yes, it's all within the docket item, so I wouldn't need an additional docket. I just provided slides. We never get slides ahead of time. Usually planning provides slides at the meeting. We don't get them usually beforehand. I did provide them a little bit before the meeting, but I understand not long enough before. It's 21 pages, but it's really only 10 pages. There's the additional pages at the end was if there were other questions that information was there. But the gist of it is just 10 pages long. About submitting questions to the planning department, 2 months ago I did submit questions and comments, and it's been 2 months and I haven't had anything answered yet. I'd like to see it in writing. And if it was a comment, they could have said skip, 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 and then answer my questions. And I have yet to see the answers to those. And as you've said, if you have any questions, send it to the planning department, but it takes months to get those answers back. The other thing is we have had changes to the proposed code without any discussions, and the planning department made those changes. So I think it's unfair to say, oh, we don't do it, because it has been done. They changed MRT or VC1 definition, maximum height or something, and I caught that. I didn't know if there were other changes that they did do without discussion with the committee, without doing an update. So it is different from what was presented.
We had talked about reducing the height in that particular way. We are going to go through, I guess we're doing the last item first. We are going to go through all of the text in a methodical way, as efficiently as we possibly can. That's what the memo in the packet was proposing, is a methodology for going through all of the text in substantive sections. And that if we did it that way, we could incorporate any amendments that might be appropriate along the way within that text. However, I would like to move to the next item shortly after the next two speakers. We have an item we'd like to dispose of tonight and send to public hearing in the fall. Then how about we come back and go through that planning department memo and talk about those substantive sections. Councilor Danberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you, Madam Chair, have said this evening, I was copied along with the planning department and other counselors that President Albright and the planning department on all of the correspondence that went back and forth here. And I am aware that for at least a couple of weeks, you, Madam Chair, have been requesting that this material be sent to the planning department. We have now heard from President Albright that it is a violation of the open meeting law to send an opinion, which this is an opinion on, and a very detailed one, on changes that ought to be made to the VCOD and MRT. And so I think that we've had enough discussion on this. This is not an item that should be discussed tonight because it came in at 4:23 this afternoon. And I think that I'm very glad to have received it. I am looking forward, as I'm sure we all are, to reading it and getting into it, but it's going to take a good deal of study and understanding to get through this. And so let's go with what we need to do with the sticking to our agenda tonight. I think that the discussion on this has gone far enough, and I, for one, would like to get on with the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Danberg. Councilor Laredo, anything else?
I do, Madam Chair. So as you're well aware, at the beginning of May, I posed a series of questions to the planning department and posted it. Will I have an opportunity to ask those questions publicly next week?
If you must, many of those questions have already been asked and answered in our committee.
I've read the committee reports. I attend virtually all the committee meetings, Madam Chair. I do not recall most of those questions having been answered. So
You might want to read the reports again, because the
I-
reports very clearly talk about, many of your questions were about outreach and how many postcards and
those-
to butters and all of that.
those aren't the questions I want to ask about because they
Okay.
were satisfactorily answered, but there are others that were not. So I would, since we're very concerned about the public meeting law
Sure.
here, I'd like an opportunity to ask those questions in public and get answers in public. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody
Madam Chair?
else on this subject? Who is
Councilor Baker.
Councilor Baker, you have joined us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I haven't heard all of the discussion. I apologize, colleagues, I'm out of town, but I do think it's important that Councilor Wright, as any counselor in a committee should be able to do, to present an idea and have it understood. I would respectfully disagree with the characterization that a prior submission of information to the council is violating the open meeting law. There's a specific decision of the Supreme Judicial Court on that issue. So I think that Councilor Wright is trying to provide information to the committee. I understand that the committee needs time to digest it, but I understand from you that you're willing to set aside time at the next meeting so that we can have a full airing of what she has in mind. And I hope that's the case. Is that accurate?
Well, I don't know how much of our conversation you just missed, but I made it very clear that I offered time this evening to Councilor Wright if she had submitted materials in advance, so the council, because the council requested that.
I understand that point, but I understood other colleagues asking time to review the documents and hear about it and have a conversation about it at the next meeting. Is that
Yes.
available?
That's,
Okay.
well, not,
That's helpful.
we're going to start early and we'll probably go late, but yes.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you for the clarification. And thank you,
Okay.
colleagues. Apologies.
And President Albright.
I just want to clarify something that Councilor Baker may or may not have heard. They didn't, what KP Law was presenting at the webinar, what they said was that it is a violation for one counselor to email all the counselors with opinions. They didn't say it was a violation for any counselor to send material to the whole council to be discussed at a public meeting. That is perfectly appropriate. So I just want to make sure that there's a distinction there.
I think that's very helpful, and I think that's consistent with the Supreme Court decision, Supreme Judicial Court. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues. Apologies. I have to leave you, but I'll try and come back if I can.
All right, thank you, Councilor Baker. Okay, I'm looking for, no, let's lay this on the table. Motion to lay this on the table, Councilor Leary? Okay, thank you. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, that does it. We have another separate item, and the purpose, we've talked about this once before in committee, which is on my agenda. Item 206-23, discussion and possible ordinance to allow for breweries, brew pubs, and other craft beverage production. And it is our intention, after some discussion this evening, this material was in the packet, a brief presentation, to set a public hearing for this item. Thank you, members of the Planning Board. Have a good night. So, Mr. Lamel, is this you? Thank you.
Happy to take this one. Yep. So as the chair said, the proposal here is to create a new use. There's some other cleanup associated with it, but a new use to allow things like breweries, wineries, craft beverage sales in business zones, mixed-use zones, and manufacturing zones. Next slide. we'll go through all these things quickly. Next slide. So as we discussed last month, there's a kind of relic in the zoning ordinance, a prohibition era policy, which does not allow the bottling of alcoholic beverages. So breweries, brew pubs, things like that are not allowed in Newton. Although at the same time, we kind of allow all of these things in some different way, separate and apart, right? We allow restaurants that sell beer and wine. We allow bars. We allow liquor stores, and we have manufacturing districts that allow the creation of products adjacent to something like beer or wine, like a bakery. And there's a lot of benefits to these types of spaces and these types of uses, well beyond just tax revenue for the city. They act as kind of third spaces for the city, for the community, and I think they fit very nicely within kind of existing
Lisa, your
areas.
rule is that when you come inside from being all sweaty and dirty with bug shit all over you, you shower.
Excuse me,
right?
could you please mute?
Oh, Peter.
Madam, could you please mute?
Okay, next slide. Until then. I think when it comes to zoning that allows breweries and wineries and things like that, it's very clear that permissive zoning makes a big difference. You can look here kind of across the metro region and see kind of going from left to right the zoning where breweries, wineries, things like that are allowed in green, allowed by special permit with a red outline or not addressed, and just breweries and other craft beverage services pervade where the zoning is permissive. Next slide. And just these are kind of a visual examples of kind of where these places exist, and I think you could imagine many places in Newton where a brewery or a craft beverage facility would make a lot of sense, given these kind of contextual photos. Next slide. And so this is really the crux of what we're putting forward. Essentially, we would remove the prohibition on alcoholic bottling, and then in that process create a new use for craft beverage services. And as part of that kind of more detailed, nuanced approach, there would be a split between off-premise consumption, which I think you could think of as, again, a kind of boutique craft beverage store where they're creating, and then you can go and have a small store where it's being sold, or on-premise consumption, where, again, that's your more traditional microbrewery or winery. There's a cap of these uses allowed by right in the business, mixed use, and manufacturing zones of 10,000 square feet. Above 10,000 square feet requires a special permit. Next slide. So like I just said, business zones, mixed use zones. As the village center work goes forward, we obviously want to include this use within the village center zones. And then in its current form, the business zones, mixed-use zones, manufacturing zone would have parking requirements. These are fairly similar to our restaurant and retail uses right now, with some minor differences. It's a little bit more lax, but again, parking would be required. So again, by right for up to 10,000 square feet, special permit above that, and parking requirements. Next slide. Happy to turn it over to the committee for discussion with the hope that a public hearing is set for the first meeting in September. Thank you all so much.
Okay, perfect timing. Councilor Lipoff, since you've been bringing this forward, would you like to say a few words?
Just that I was not alive when Prohibition ended, so I felt that this would be a good way to get involved in history in the city of Newton. I believe, as I go around Greater Boston and see the vibrance that craft brewing brings to other cities and towns, I just asked the question, why can't we have it here? And Mr. Lamel and I and others from planning said to each other, why not? Let's do it. Let's look at the zoning code. Let's figure out what we need to do. And that's what we've been doing for the past few months. And I think that we're now ready for a public hearing. I think it makes a lot of sense. We have all different kinds of spaces that could benefit from this that are empty right now. We have Union Street, Newton Center. We have a tap room that didn't work out, but I hear there's one lined up ready to go. We have other properties that, God willing, will be built in the future at Riverside and Northland that'll have spaces that could be just perfect for this kind of business, and I'm excited to bring it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any, Councillor Leary and then Danberg?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wholeheartedly appreciate Councillor Lipoff's presentation of this item, which I think is very valuable, and I think it's going to really contribute to thriving village centers. And I have a place for one on Riverdale on California Street that I'm looking at. So I think this is a wonderful proposal, and I fully support sending it to a public hearing. I just question why we're requiring parking when we just had a letter from the Chamber of Commerce President Greg Riebman about the economic barriers that parking costs, particularly our small businesses, and particularly if we're putting this in walkable areas. Just something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leary. Councillor Danberg?
Thank you. And thank you, Councillor Lipoff, for bringing this forward. It's high time that we do something like this. I think we've all seen the success of places like Jack's Abbey in Framingham. It's brought vibrancy and business into the Framingham area. We can do the same thing here. Councillor Leary has a spot for it in Ward 1. I've got another spot for it in Newton Center. And we've got spots for these places all over the city. So I think I agree that we should bring this forward. Let's move it to public hearing and get this thing underway. I also agree that this is not the kind of use that should require parking. This is clearly a business use. If it's in a village center, we certainly are not going to be requiring parking for our other businesses in village centers, and the owner and developer, whoever is putting this in, is going to be able to best determine how much parking is needed so that their customers and employees can be accommodated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Danberg. I see Councillor Ryan and then Humphrey online.
Since everybody else is standing, I totally support this. It's a great, and we were talking about village centers tonight and always, and what a great addition to a lot of our village centers. And Vice President Lipoff's right. We have so many empty spaces and so many empty storefronts that we need this. And I also agree with my other colleagues that why are we requiring parking? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Humphrey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I had a few questions about this after seeing the presentation. I think it's definitely interesting, like about 8 years ago, it came up in the city council elections that there was concern that Newton might become a millennial mecca. And while that certainly hasn't happened, it's interesting to see this kind of proposal come forward now. However, that also raises some skepticism in my mind because that 8 years have gone by. This does feel to me like something that, while it's not necessarily going to be a bad thing, it's probably not going to have as many advantages or benefits as we're hearing about tonight, just because of the fact that we are once again so far behind all the other trends that we're going to miss out on them and miss the boat on those, just as we did with some of the other stuff around biotech and some things like that. In any case, if we are going to do this, I did have some specific questions. The maps, I think, were interesting, showing the regional distribution of this, because it confirmed what I had sort of already suspected about a lot of these other locations that are operating, which is that the vast majority of them are in extremely transit-rich environments, transit density environments. And there, I guess, are some locations that were mentioned tonight as possibilities for this type of use in Newton that are near transit, some of them less so. I think this is only going to work if they're right near transit and there's not really a parking component, because that's what people are looking for. They want to be able to ride to the thing, socialize, drink at it, not have to drive afterwards. And so I'm wondering to what extent we're factoring that in to the planning for this, and also some of the industrial zones that have been discussed, while they might theoretically seem like they're a good idea for this, are not necessarily near transit. So I was hoping to get a little bit of clarity on the planning department's thinking on that, because I think that is going to be kind of a critical impediment to actually getting some of these built after they're allowed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Humphrey. I see also, I'll take Councillor Krinsman on the committee first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This might be a question for Mr. Lee or you or whomever. I agree with my colleagues who talked about the desire to remove the parking requirements. I know we've talked about that in a number of different instances. I certainly don't want to add a parking requirement like is contemplated here. My question is, do we as a committee do that prior to the public hearing? I know we're very particular about what goes to public hearing and what changes can be made at different points in the process. So I'm wondering if we want to take that language out. I'm happy to make that motion, take that language out before we send it to the public hearing.
Thank you,
I can
Councillor
support that,
Krinsman.
Madam Chair.
Attorney Lee? Oh, thank you.
I'll be sure to make the public hearing notice broad enough that it's going to cover whether the parking requirement is included or if it's taken out, so that won't be an issue.
Okay, I appreciate that. I don't know what other amendments would be in order after the public hearing, but I appreciate Attorney Lee's help with the flexibility built into that, because I do think we should discuss this as a committee. I like the idea. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks so much. I imagine that would also, Attorney Lee, pertain to where the use could go, or is that going to be very specifically laid out in the public hearing notice?
It's going to be broad, Madam Chair. It's going to have the subject matter. It is going to refer to the text. Small tweaks are absolutely appropriate as long as it's not a significantly different proposal than what has been previously discussed and presented to the Zoning and Planning Committee.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much. Councillor Lucas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. For this zoning ordinance, if this passes, would a brewery of sorts, would this be allowed by right, or would it require a special permit, or would it need to go to the licensing board?
I'm happy to take that.
Yeah, please go ahead, Mr.
So it would have to go to the licensing board and get all of those. It would have to check all of those boxes as a part of this. That's required by other ordinances, other laws at different levels of government. We're proposing that from a zoning perspective, it would be allowed by right in the business zones, in the mixed use zones and manufacturing zones, in sites under 10,000 square feet. Above 10,000 square feet would require a special permit.
Okay, so above 10,000 square feet would require a special permit. Did I hear that correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. That's all I have.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. President Albright.
If I may, Madam Chair, I think this is the kind of zoning proposal that requires a site visit to see if the vibrancy really exists in other cities and towns.
I think we had that conversation last time, and there was a lot of enthusiasm for a site visit. I think that Councilor Lipoff might want to organize one.
I'm going to get a short bus and we're going to go somewhere fancy, okay?
All right, there we go.
I can make some friendly amendments to that list of places to visit.
All righty. I think Councilor Baker, you were trying to speak. You have don't have your hand up, but did you want to say?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to master the technology. I just, in terms of the scope of the public hearing, I think that the question of what is a special permit and the threshold is itself a policy discussion I'd like to have a conversation about, not tonight, obviously, but as I understand it, Mr. Lee, we would have the opportunity to be more limiting in the sense of what could be done as a right if the way you're drafting this, not that the committee has to choose that. I just want to be clear that we have flexibility to go from a fully as a right to a special permit in perhaps different contexts. Is that still within the scope of the hearing notice?
Councilor Baker, are you talking about the current parameters that are being proposed as to what would require a special permit and potentially changing that?
Yes, because I think the point is that the conversation, we may learn things in the conversation that goes forward. We might say, all right, this may seem like a good idea in some places, but in other places, we'd like to have a little more review through the council or a special permit. And I just want to make sure that if we make that judgment, not that we have to or we should, that the scope of the hearing, just as indicated by Councilor Kritzman, we can do things in both directions if we think they're warranted by the public interest.
Yes, the public hearing notice will be written in a way where that's well within the scope of what can be changed.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay, so what we want to do this evening is agree that we want to go forward and set a public hearing, and is there a recommendation for September and maybe the first meeting in September? How does that sit with everybody? Head nods? Okay, so would someone like to make a motion on the committee? Councilor Danberg. I would like a motion to set the public hearing for our first meeting in September.
I make a motion that we set the public hearing for this item for the first meeting in September.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? I believe that's unanimous, and we now have 8. Okay, so we need a motion to hold this item. I think Councilor Danberg was also going to do that.
Motion to hold the item.
And sorry, Councilor Kritzman, I just can't see you as easily. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed or nay or abstentions? That is also unanimous. All righty then. I have a motion, motion to take the item 3822 off. I'm sorry, put it back on the table. Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any abstentions or opposition? Okay, it is 10 minutes of 9, and we have a proposal here to go through, to begin our deliberations on this version 2 Village Center Zoning Overlay District by the organized, substantive sections that are laid out in the memo the Planning Department put forward. This is very much like what we did in June of 2022 when we were looking at the framework. We had more sections at that time, but and then we would take up the maps as a separate element once we go through the text. The idea would be that planning would give a brief presentation of the elements that comprise each section, and then we would have a discussion. The discussion hopefully would reveal whatever concerns anybody might still have. If there are simple amendments, they could be put forward. A recommendation is that we take straw votes on each substantive section, and that we do it before major substantive amendments. As I said earlier, I've agreed to put Ms. Wright on, Councilor Wright on the agenda next week. It sounds like we should probably hear from her first, so that we can, that will carry that through the rest of our discussion. And if there are substantive amendments after that, perhaps, we'll have a sense of the committee. This is going to take a while. But we'll have a sense of the committee at that point, so perhaps that's the most efficient way to go through the text. If we can do that between July 31st and even if we have to move into August 14th, the sense of the committee and the straw votes will give planning some clear direction on modifications to the text, changes, so that a final version can be ready for the reopening of the public hearing in September. I am hoping too that we won't need much time on the 14th because we'd really like to go through the maps. As we said earlier at the end of the public hearing, we have actually a number of specific and even some citywide general recommendations for both adding and subtracting to the way the maps are presented. And most of those groups, I think, are going to the planning department to have some kind of a discussion. Some has already taken place. We heard some tonight that we urged folks to come to the planning department with their materials so that they can be understood before we have that meeting. So there's some time between now and August 14th, which should help. Of course, amendments are in order beginning next week, but I am hoping that we can go through what we have with some, conversation so that we can agree on, any sort of relatively minor changes. Of course, we can have discussions about anything so that we can take those straw votes. So, any comments? Councilor Leary, and then Baker. Oh, and actually, can I call on Mr. Lamel first? Did I miss something?
No, I think that was really good, but I think it might be helpful given the previous conversation about Councilor Wright's materials and this suggested approach to move through the zoning. I think there's a really good, way we could talk about it and maybe explain how we might see this. You could see this going based on how we're working. So I think, if I'm correct, Councilor Wright, in some of the material you put forward, you're recommending that the special permit threshold be lowered to 15,000 square feet for the parcel size. Is that correct?
I recommend that we play with the database and come up with something that we agree upon. Sure. I mean, I wouldn't mind going...
I think in this proposal, it's saying roughly 15,000 square feet is the recommendation.
I think he's trying to give an example.
Yeah, I'm just trying to give an example.
I put example in there, so this is not my default. This
Sure.
is the way we have to do it. In my example, and with the database, you can see what comes out, the number of units, if you went down to 15,000 square feet.
So I think let's just take that as an example, right? The first recommended kind of overarching principle is the approval thresholds, which would be special permit and site plan review. Last year in June, we did this in committee. The proposal was 3/4 of an acre for special permit, which is a little over 32,000 square feet. We're at 30,000 square feet. The straw vote was 6-2 in committee, so that's why the proposal is the way that it is right now, because the committee, put forward a 6-2 straw vote, and us as the planning department went with that. Because it seemed like that was the role of the committee. And then I think what's coming up, the first item will be that item where we're saying in the ordinance language, we are recommending a special permit threshold of 30,000 square feet. And your data and your information is saying, I would like to amend that to a lower number, and that would then go to the ZAP committee for consideration. So I think what you're putting forward will work really, really well within this process. But I also just want to make sure, and I think the memo that was put forward, it's what is existing right now in version 2 or version 2.1, whatever you want to call it, is, as to the best of our abilities, reflective of this committee's desires, from conversations we've had, from straw votes that have been taken, things like that. So, you know, I look forward to all the amendments, and again, the committee, it'll be up to all of you to decide.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Councilor Baker had his hand up, okay? And then I'll go back to
Yeah, and
Councilor Wright.
apologies again, colleagues. I'm operating remotely and under some difficult circumstances and trying to understand what's happening, so bear with me. But I just have two things. One is the public hearing has been held open, and one of the concerns I have is that we still have not heard potentially from all the public who want to speak about the proposal. Now, we didn't, you closed the hearing tonight because the comments ran out, but I guess the question I'm trying to understand is, are we taking straw votes to advance to a new public hearing, a continued public hearing? Just can you clarify what that, in other words, what are we ending up with the public commenting on? Is it going to be commenting on a different document or a modified document?
I'm going to let Andrew Lee, if he will, speak to this a bit. I believe, well, anything that was on our minds as, and what we know is left open still for discussion and consideration is in this packet. Stuff that's coming to us that I haven't seen yet. You know, maybe more than that, maybe. So we're going to have to discuss in committee where we draw the line. But for example, we know we have a proposal before us from the Newton Housing Partnership for 1 or 2 tiers of a density bonus for more affordable units. The committee might be able to decide which it wants, one or both of those, to move into a revised document. Right now, it looks like they're both in there, you know, but we haven't really had that discussion. There have been folks who have talked about, I'll name one, you know.
I'm not trying to ask you to go through them all. I'm just trying to, if I bear with me for a minute, I'm just saying that as a conversation in committee, there may still be comments that would influence the committee's ultimate decision. We're talking about straw votes, not a final vote on an item, and ultimately the council. So my understanding is that the purpose of this is to try and get clarity as you go forward about where the committee is on these various components, even if they're modified later, correct?
I'm not sure. I'm sorry, I missed your question in that statement.
No. What I'm trying to understand is that we may learn things. There are 2 different questions, so let me try and make it more simple. People are commenting right now on the version that is before us. The planning department is going to go through that and will entertain amendments. If some amendments occur, will the modified version then be the conversation subject of the continued public hearing in the future? Is that what I'm understanding?
So my understanding is that these are straw votes, and you're free to abstain. And, you know, we've gotten a sense of the committee in the past, we've taken straw votes in the past. It gives us a sense of direction. I think we're talking about mostly, outside of Councilor Wright's proposal.
Well, I'm not going to get into the topics. I'm just trying to understand.
Yes, we are proposing that we would have a revised text for September. But you know, if it's a major revision, this is why I was asking Attorney Lee to opine on this, depending on the nature of the revision and what we're doing with it. You know, would we have to notice a new public hearing? You know, that's
Madam Chair, can I just try to clarify this
Yes, please.
Simply, hopefully I can, but to answer your question succinctly, Councilor Baker, the public hearing that's continuing is going to be that same public hearing that was previously open that was continued tonight as well. It's not going to be a new public hearing. There's not going to be a new proposal that's being submitted to the city council. As you understand, is a requirement under 48. This is going to be the same proposal. However, it can be tweaked. Like we just had that discussion with regards to the craft brewery, which is a much more limited amendment. But you certainly can have little tweaks to what was actually proposed and the actual text. So through the straw vote process, depending on the scope and exactly what is being proposed and what the changes are, it may be well within the public hearing notice and the current public hearing that is currently pending. And I believe, and I want to mention this just so that nobody is surprised here, I believe that there is a plan, depending on the scope of what these changes are, to notice the public hearing that's continued. Again, very clearly, not a new public hearing, but just out of an abundance of caution. And to be conservative is to make sure that another notice is going to be published pursuant to Chapter 48. It's not going to be a new public hearing notice. It's just going to be notice that the public hearing is continued and where the public can find these updated materials.
So I understand that part, and so what I'm hearing is that the straw votes may not modify the document much. The question for the chair, however, and our colleagues, are there major issues still within the document? And the committee might come out one way, but for instance, the parking requirement is one that several of us have had some misgivings about. There are members of the committee who prefer no parking requirement, and there are other members of the committee who express reservations about not having one. There are questions about whether special permits should still be required for some structures and not for others. So the question I'm trying to understand is, as we go forward in the next meeting, we could have a conversation. There could be straw votes, and maybe those straw votes will be along the same lines the committee has taken before. But as my experience in zoning work, that we always have the opportunity to say, well, we want to change our mind about this, and we think that maybe the parking requirements should be maintained. Right now, they started in the ordinance. They've now been taken out. But if we want to keep them in, that's still within our power, as I understand it. Am I correct?
Yes.
I'm just using that as an example.
Yes.
I'm not arguing for the policy. I'm just trying to understand.
Amendments are in order, and you and others are free to make them.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I'm still going to be traveling, but I'll do the best I can to get anything into the packet on Friday. Thank you, Madam Chair.
That would be terrific. And sending them in advance would be helpful to everyone, because we're going to have our work cut out for us at the next meeting. Thank you. Councilor Wright. Councilor Wright.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question on amendments. So one of the things I'd like to see is VC3 going to VC2, except for a smaller select area. So do I make an amendment for everything like 49 Union Street? I make a proposal to make it VC2. 50 Union Street, I propose to make it VC2. Do I do that, or do I do it otherwise? And do I submit this ahead of time or at the meeting?
Well, we're going to start maps on the 14th of August. I'm sure we won't be ready to do it before then. And as you heard, there are a number of other map changes. Some people have submitted to the planning department, if they have yet, I'm not sure, but suggestions across the city in the form of maps with a list of proposed changes. Other people, like Ms. Hisihara, has a very specific request. Those are best handled when we take up the maps.
But address by address, or just overall?
I think by address is what we need to be. We're pretty far along with the maps. If we are making surgical changes in designating which zone goes where, they should be proposed and taken up.
Okay, and then do you want it ahead of time, or I'm just going to do it at the meeting?
I think it would be very helpful to at least give it to the planning department ahead of time. I don't know this, but maybe something you're proposing, somebody else is proposing, and we don't need to take it up twice. You know, I don't know, we haven't had this conversation, but I imagine when we go through maps, we have to go through by village, so that we all know where we are when we have these particular changes. In your overview presentation, I imagine you want to talk about maps, but then that would be helpful to talk about your approach, not the specific sites. And
I do have my proposed maps in those
Okay.
slides as an addition. So I try to keep my first 10 slides very high level, and I was just going to talk from a high level, but if people had questions and wanted more details, there were additional slides there.
I'll see what the committee thinks, but I think the only way to get clear about what we want to wind up with is to be specific with the maps by village on the 14th, and maybe we have to go into September, but I hope not. President Albright.
I think it would be really helpful if we all challenged ourselves to provide amendments and map changes in advance so that they could be studied in advance. And so if I have some amendments I'm thinking about, I think they should, if they're text amendments, they should be in the Friday packet this coming Friday. If they're map amendments, they should be on time for the August 14th amendments. So I think we should challenge ourselves to do that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because, you know, it will help our process and help us to be more efficient in the meeting, and no one wants to spend time coming in on an August night or the end of July and, you know, be wandering all over the place. So
then we can submit a memo for this Friday package with our amendments, proposed amendments, to be part of the Friday package. That's what I'm hearing.
Madam Chair?
Yes. Mr. Lamel.
If I could.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think in the memo we prepared for this meeting, you know, again, we're recommending, I think, 8 straw votes. Each one of those lays out the different sections of the ordinance. So I think if there's amendments to those specific ordinances and your submit sections, those specific sections, you could organize them in that fashion, so that when item 2 is being taken up and these are the sections and these are the amendments you want to propose, we know we're taking them up at that exact time.
Yes, thank you. That would be extremely helpful. Councilor Laredo. Oh, sorry, Councilor Baker.
I'll defer to Councilor Baker. I'll wait.
Yes, Madam Chair, just as a process matter, it'd be helpful to have the document we have is a PDF. If we have a Word version of what the planning department generated, it will be easier to look at it as a document to work from. So I hope that might be feasible.
Is that something we can do? Yes, that is something they can do.
Thank you.
All right. And I see that Councilor Bowman's been waiting online too and hasn't spoken yet, so I'm going to go to Councilor Bowman. Oh, hold on, Councilor Bowman. Attorney Lee?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry to belabor a point that's been discussed extensively through this meeting, but I do want to reserve the opportunity for the law department to advise on the best way for the information to be submitted and then disseminated when the information is coming from counselors. I do know that we had addressed this, I believe in 2020, it was 3 years ago now, but it was pretty much the exact same question. The exact advice isn't coming to me, but I would like the opportunity for the law department to weigh in before councilors start submitting things and disseminating them to potentially other counselors, which may be a violation of the open meeting law.
Okay, did everybody get that?
So could I ask Mr. Lee a question?
Sure.
So if people submit their possible amendments to the clerk's office, and the clerk's office compiles them and puts them out in the Friday packet, does that make it any better for you with respect to the open meeting law?
It does not, because the open meeting law prohibits the dissemination of council opinions because that's deliberation on a subject matter that's before the council, two other counselors. That's the rule, that's the law. I understand the SJC case that Councilor Baker was referring to from 2018. I believe it's Bobert, if my memory is correct. My point is that I just do not want the council to, or the committee to settle on how information needs to be submitted without the law department having the opportunity to weigh in, which I'm unfortunately unable to do at this moment with certainty. So that's the only purpose for me injecting myself right now to this conversation.
So, Attorney Lee, by when could you submit a memo to us clarifying the legal procedure?
We'll address it tomorrow. As I mentioned, there is a memo that was, I believe, that had gone out in 2020 or so. Again, I don't have it in front of me, and I will look at it, and the law department will give some further advice by tomorrow.
And somehow sorry, Councilor Baker, just let me follow up.
Sure.
So somehow committee members and council can have a heads up on proposed amendments. Is that correct? You're not telling us that we can't put them forward in advance.
I'm going to reserve answering that until tomorrow when I've had the opportunity to look at the memo and can better fully advise the council.
Okay, Councilor Baker.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to Attorney Lee, Law Department's advice is always welcome. But Councilor Laredo and I put together a memo back when the original memo came out, and the members of the council should have access to that. My view is that we've got a catch-22 if we can't put those forward. Members of the council obviously would like to have time to review things in advance. The department should have a chance to respond to them. And if so, we need to put them in the Friday packet so that we can all do exactly what people wanted to do tonight, which is have time to review them. If the law department says, no, you can't do that until the meeting, then we've got to take up them on the night of the meeting. We can't do that without suspending our rules. So the simplest way to proceed here is for every member of the committee who has an amendment, if they can, to put it in on Friday. I don't think that precludes, in my experience, the opportunity to offer additional amendments based on the conversation that goes forward in committee. And then we'll see where we go. But the idea that there's no possibility of presenting an amendment in advance is really contrary to all our procedure, because that's the idea that we have a chance to reflect on it in advance. So while I understand the department's desire to update its views, Councilor Laredo and I put forward an interpretation of the rules that I think is within the scope of the open meeting law that would precisely allow us to do what we want to do in the Friday packet. So I welcome the advice, but I also want to indicate that the council is the client, and we have the opportunity to decide what we think is in the public interest and consistent with the law.
Councilor Baker, I share your frustration. Let's hear from the law department tomorrow, and you know, this is a procedural matter, so we can discuss it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councilor Bowman, you are next.
And then thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Thank you very much. So I just wanted to weigh in specifically about the types of changes being requested concerning individual parcels of land. We've had a hard enough time getting the message out to building owners and to residents about potential changes. I want to make sure that if the process that we would use to, such as the process, the parcels that Councilor Wright was discussing about downzoning from VC3 to VC2, that we do it in a way such that we're involving those building owners in the process and making sure that they're attending meetings where that will be presented. So I really feel like if people have suggestions on specific properties, that we need a process that maybe allows us to give input to the planning department, and the planning department publishes a list of parcels that councilors want to have reviewed as part of the process, just so that we can be more transparent with people. I think that that's just going to be much people are happy and they're like, I'm happy with VC3, I'm feeling great about that, and I'm not going to show up at a meeting. I want to be able to make sure, or vice versa. I want to make sure that we're doing that. I also think that some of the changes that say were suggested by Councilor Wright really need time for planning to evaluate them and, and to understand the impact of them. Some of them could have quite a dramatic impact. That change from 30,000 square feet to 15,000 square feet by special permit would take a lot of properties out of the MBTA zoning, because they would no longer be by right. So I think things like that, it would be difficult for us to vote on in one meeting, because they would need time to be evaluated. So I think a process that allows planning to get a heads up on those, and so they can begin to do those evaluations, will just help us be more productive in the process. So that's it. But thank you, and I understand this is a very complicated process, and I feel excited by the comments we've heard earlier today by many people who understand the issues the city is facing and are supportive of the many goals that we have here. So devil's in the details, but thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilor Bowman. Councilor Leary, you were next. Got the memory.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I was actually just going to mention that I also had map changes that I would like to submit, and my intention is to submit them in the Friday packet. And I just think what Councilor Bowman just brought up, relates to everything. Many of these changes are substantial, and they will take, review. It's only fair to give the planning department time, as well as our fellow councilors time, to digest it, so that we can actually have we can make the best use of our time during our committee meetings. So I'm now quite perplexed by Mr. Lee's comments. We've been submitting things to the Friday packet for, I don't know, hundreds of years now, it seems. And that's always been the way. My understanding, as long as the public gets to see this information the same as the councilors, that we're not breaking any open meeting law. And now I'm a little concerned that we're not going to be giving either the councilors, the public, or the law, or the planning department time to digest some of these changes.
I don't think there's any prohibition about sending material to the planning department. So there are a couple of groups out in the city who have already done that, and a couple more who are intending to, as I understand it. So there's no harm in doing that. I'm quite sure of that. I think
Madam Chair, that's correct. The city councilors can send information or their opinions, whatever it might be, to the planning department to the heart's content.
Thank you. So I think the question that Law wants to feel more comfortable with is whether we can put stuff into the Friday packet. And maybe there's a way that it just goes through planning. I don't know the answer to that. Why don't we wait and hear from Law? It is frustrating. It's very frustrating to me, because you want to do the work, you want to give people a heads up, you want time to review the material, and we know we can't just send an email out to the council, because the public doesn't see that. So,
Madam Chair, you can send an email to the council so long as it's posted and it pertains to a matter coming up before the hearing, before the public meeting. It's not that. What I think that it's important to make a distinction. Councilors are not precluded by the open meeting law from communicating in advance of a meeting, as long as that information is available to the public at the same time. What we're trying to avoid is backdoor conversation.
Chair, that's the exact piece that I had respectfully requested that the law department have the opportunity to respond to. Like I said, I'm not going to do it in real time and have a debate with Councilor Baker right now, but I'm just reiterating the law department's position on this.
okay, let's see what you come up with, and then we can complain. So I'm with you. Councilor Laredo and then President Albright.
So Attorney Lee, Councilor Baker and I prepared a very detailed memo over 2 years ago now on this exact question. I suggest strongly that you refer to it. The author of the opinion at that time, who talked about the violation of the open meeting law, made quite explicit in that opinion that there would have been no open meeting law violation if the communication had been posted contemporaneously. The open meeting law problem was because it wasn't posted. And that's exactly, I think, the concern Councilor Leary's trying to get at. Not only is it customary, but it's quite appropriate, for example, in a Friday packet to say, here are 3 amendments before the full city council that I intend to propose at the meeting Monday night. I want everyone to be able to read those. Not only is that practical, but that serves exactly the purpose of the open meeting law. The councilors and the public are notified at the exact same time as to what the topic of discussion is. And frankly, if the law department concludes that we cannot engage in those communications, then I don't see how Councilor Wright could post her very detailed memo in advance of any meeting. And that, in my mind, would be absolutely foolish. So I'm going to urge the law department to really look at the memo that Councilor Baker and I prepared. We put a lot of thought into it. I'm very happy to talk to you offline about it, as I'm sure Councilor Baker is, although with due respect for his vacation, I'll take the lead on this one. But I'm very concerned, actually, with the idea that we're not going to be able to have a free and full flow of information, and that the public's going to be actually limited in finding out what we're thinking about. And that goes to my next point, Madam Chair, that I was going to urge. I appreciate that you want amendments to go to the planning department, or proposed changes to go to the planning department first, so that they can compile them. And if someone's already made that change, or they're getting 3 of the same suggestions, they can take that into consideration. What I think, though, is critically important is that the planning department then report back to this committee and the full council each and every one of the proposed changes, and whether they accepted them or rejected them, and if so, why. It doesn't have to be a lengthy document, but my concern is you might have 4 councilors with exactly the same suggestion to take a parcel of land outside of, to move it out of a village center zone, whichever one that is. Councilor Leary and Councilor Danberg, Councilor Oliver, and President Albright all suggested. The planning department in its wisdom says, now we're not going to do that. That may be fine, but we then have absolutely no way of knowing what our colleagues are thinking and what planning's thinking is. And I think if we're going to be transparent here, we need to know what planning's thinking is when they accept or reject any particular recommendation.
Well,
Thank
why
you.
wouldn't that come up in the course of our meeting? So the reason to send it to planning is so that they can be prepared to have the discussion with us.
But we may get a suggestion from an outside group.
We
that-
have and we will.
And some are communicated directly to us, and some may be communicated to the planning department. We get a flood of information. All I'm suggesting is if they're going to be making decisions about which changes to make and which ones not to make, they should be keeping track and informing this body of what their decision-making process is. That's all. It's not, they have the right, and I think indeed the obligation, to make a recommendation. But we ought to know what the thinking is behind those recommendations, and that's critical. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Let's see.
So, Madam Chair,
And I have
Madam Chair.
Councilor Bowman and Baker in that order online.
Thank you. I'm just going to quickly follow on to what we just heard from Councilor Laredo. My suggestion was that planning has made their suggestions at this point. That's my feeling, and that the changes going forward, it is, I think it's probably what we might hear from Councilor Baker, is that it really is our responsibility as City Council to vote on the final version parcel by parcel. And so my suggestion again on the specific changes to the parcels and this I guess could apply to any changes, is that we give them to planning, they have time to evaluate them, but we discuss them all. And they come up and planning can recommend, can let us know what the impact is, can let us know their recommendations about changing them or not changing them. But ultimately we would get to vote on them. But I think it's very difficult for us to understand what the impact is of, say, moving from VC3 to VC2 in large sections of a village center if they haven't had a chance to do the calculations in the model and help us better understand that. So I think, again, I think this information needs to go to planning. They can evaluate it, and then they should be providing us back a list of all the changes that were suggested, whether it's suggested by counselors, property owners, residents, other organizations, and then their feelings about it, and then we have a chance to discuss it. That would be my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bowman. We'll be having a staff meeting tomorrow. We'll discuss all of these suggestions and think some more about how to organize our next couple meetings. Councilor Baker and then Wright.
So thank you, Madam Chair. I think that the chair may be surprised, but I'm going to say that I agree with her sort of division of labor. The idea next time is to look at the ordinance itself in terms of the base policy choices that are marbled into it and see if there is agreement or not agreement about the basic ordinance structure and the content. The amendments to specific locations for parcels as proposed in the zoning map, as I understand it, is going to be set aside for the next meeting in August. I think it makes sense to make those distinctions, but I think it's still in order to try and propose those by counselors, getting them into the packet in advance. The department can respond to them at the meeting. It doesn't require them to respond instantly, but the process we are talking about is at least having some orderly flow of information to the public and from counselors to the public and the department through that process of what people might have in mind. The department can certainly take a position one way or another, but I think that what you've outlined as a process where we do put things in the packet and everybody has a chance to see them in advance makes some sense. As we go forward, there may be details and other things for some further review with more time in advance, but I think for the moment, the process that you've outlined makes some sense to me.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. It's always nice to be on your side. Councilor Wright.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilor Bowman has some concerns, and I would have concerns too, about making changes and how that affects in the total build out and compliance to the MBTA Communities Act. And with the database, which we're making it a little bit more robust, which we're going to share with the general public and also with planning department or anyone else, you could change all your VC3s to VC2s, and within less than a second, you see the results. You can change your footprint, you can change the number of stories, you can change your setbacks, and with less than a second, all that spits out. So it's a good tool for if we're going to make these changes, we can do it really quickly and see what happens.
Okay, thank you. Now that you have submitted it, I don't know if you've submitted the tool, but whatever it was, you did not submit the tool. There's another layer to this, which of course is that we've been using UTIL and the MBTA compliance formula, which is quite specific to do these evaluations, and I don't know how compatible the two things are.
So with the 10,000 units of the MBTA units, we're within 2%. We did the calculations a little bit different than what's at UTIL. We're usually using actually setbacks and lot coverage and things like that. And actually, it's more conservative. We're actually a little bit lower. And I can go, and John and I can discuss this at a later time, but we're confident in that tool. And when we come up with the final number or what we want with setbacks, with VC2, 3, whatever, how many stories, whatever, run it through the tool. And then if you want the final one, take it through the state's formula. But we're very confident that actually the state formula will be probably higher than what will come out of this, but not by much. 2% is just reasonable.
President Albright.
I think if we're going to use a tool that's not the state's formula, then we better make sure in advance that it's compatible with the state's formula. Can you share this with the planning department? We can look at it, they can look at it with you and then go from there.
Well, the tool would be used first, and then once you can see what the results are and say, okay, we're comfortable with that. Let's put it into the state's formulas and see what spits out. And it's going to be very similar to what our tool has.
We don't have an infinite number of meetings left, so we'd like to make sure that if we vote for something, it's something that we can stand by.
Yep.
I'm going to go to Director Heath, and then I'll get you, Councilor Oliver.
Yeah, I'm just, and I'll defer to Zach on this, is I just want to be clear that we have a consistent set of data that we're working with by lot, so we have consistency across the board from the councilors, and we have an accurate listing of properties that are going to be changed that we can discuss at a meeting so that not only we know, the public knows, and then kind of methodically go through them.
We downloaded the assessor's database, and we use that data.
That's fine. So if you can get that to us, that would be extremely helpful. That goes for any changes councilors are proposing for property lots.
We want to make it a little bit more robust.
And Zach.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, we want to make it a little more robust, and John has more to deal with that.
So sorry.
Zach, I would defer to you in terms of UTIL's ability to then take that and produce the MBTA formula. I know that's quite complicated and complex.
Well, I just want to say, I mean, UTIL didn't, it's not UTIL's formula, so I think that's just a misrepresentation. It's the state's formula that UTIL is inputting for us as our consultant. I think another piece of it is to say, I think what I think is just helpful when you say something like, you know, we can put this in and then we can get comfortable with it, and maybe we can change it. I think, again, we've been working on this for a few years now. The committee held straw votes on the scale and size of development, and again, what's in the zoning right now is reflective of the city council's recommendations. I'm not saying it can't be tweaked or it shouldn't be tweaked and we got it perfect, but again, I think what the code is, what the map is reflective of the work that we've been doing in this committee over 40 plus meetings that we've had over the last 2 years.
Still, I hear you, and I understand that it is late in the process against our deadline. I got it. So I think it's fair and important for you to share this tool with the planning department. I know it's more time and more work, but I think you have to be able to look at this against, and maybe with UTIL, to understand, is this doing the same thing? Is it something that we should be using in committee? And will the rest of the council feel comfortable after, changing the methodology? And that's part of the conversation we're going to have. But I think if you can get it to the planning department pretty soon, so they have some time to look at it and see how well it aligns themselves, see how well it aligns with the MBTA compliance tool that UTIL has been using to evaluate these different scenarios. Fine, I get Zachary Lamel's point that, we're not just doing this to satisfy MBTA communities and play with numbers. We're doing this, we believe, or most of us believe, to come up with a set of rules that's going to help our village centers going into the future and help our housing situation and economics and so on and so on. So we have to talk about that. The principles behind this as much as, and then you play with the numbers to see how well you can meet your objectives. Anyway, please do share that as soon as you can with planning, I hope this week. And Councilor Oliver, you wanted to add to this?
Yes, yes, I have. So there's nothing
Can you speak
secretive
in your
about
mic,
this.
please?
Sorry. There's nothing secretive about this whatsoever. The tool is a very large Excel file. I would argue that it's infinitely more approachable for anyone here, with possibly the exception of Zach, I'm not sure, than any of the work that's being done in the DHCD formulas, because I spent hours trying to reverse engineer those, and that was really difficult. This is super easy. You literally have the ability to go in and say, I want to tinker around with, you name it, setbacks. You can change the number in the formula in one place, and it's calculated on every single lot on the VCOD 2.0 maps on the fly. And then you can change the number back if you would like. You can change the threshold for special permits. It calculates the units based on the information that's provided by DHCD. We've taken all the numbers from the DHCD formulas that we can and plugged them into this spreadsheet. It's right here. The challenge is, if I may finish, please. The challenge is we can't use the GIS files that Zach pointed to on the state website. So this is the information that was available to us. We literally went through every single lot on the maps and highlighted them in here and then changed, hey, this is being proposed as VC 1, 2, 3, MRT. That's how we got to this. This is all going to be on display for everyone to see. So I don't want to make it sound like it's some kind of, new math, because it's not. It's simpler.
And we put in, like, does it abut residential in
Absolutely,
the rear or the side, because that changed. Is it a priority street? Things like that. And then we use formulas, and this is what MBTA would calculate out. This is the total village build out. And the only thing that's not in there, which I'm still doing, and that's why it's a little late, is lot subdivision and multiple buildings on lots. And we're trying to put that into that calculation. Right now, that's kind of being done by hand. Yet that might add an extra 500,000, 2,000 units or so. But the basics is there. And like I said, I think it's more conservative. Like I just did 7-foot setbacks on the top floor. Now we have, according to our proposal, if the building's less than 70 feet wide, you don't have to have the setback. Or if it's less than 70 feet deep, you don't have to have the setback. I just said we're going to just do it, and things like that. And then I did other things, like there's a bunch of row houses. They had very small lots. So, they're not getting 4 units, they're getting 2 units because they're in small lots. So we made some I won't say tweaks, but we considered a lot of different things to put in here. But we're using the assessor's database. We got that in 5 minutes, and using the data in there. Now, I have found a few problems in the assessor database, so I send it to the assessor's office, and they give me the correct information back. Because occasionally there are things that are missing or incorrect, and we're picking up on those things too.
Okay, so can I add something? So
yes, and then Councilor Laredo.
we did this project not as a data project. And I think that's what we've a little bit lost sight of. We did this project to make our village centers a vibrant housing, mixed use, and that's why we were so upset when the state said we couldn't do mixed use by right. But the project was to make our village centers better. Along came the MBTA Communities Act after we were already on our path. So this is not about if we change the setback, we can get more units or less units. This is about what is the right formula for our village, for the village center buildings. And I don't want to turn this into a data project to satisfy the MBTA. That's not what we're trying to do here. And I thought that was the value of what we have accomplished. We've accomplished something that we like for the village centers, and that we've also figured out how to make it meet the data needs. So I don't want to turn this into a project where we tweak a setback so that we can change the numbers, because that's not thinking through what these buildings need to be to make vibrant village centers. So let's just be careful that we don't turn this into a data project instead of a project to make our village centers vibrant.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Rado and then Wright.
So, President, if I may address President Albright through the chair. The MBTA Communities Act has a very specific requirement in it that for Newton at least, we have to develop 8,330 units, or the capacity at a minimum. Planning Department, UTIL have spent a lot of time coming up with a plan that they say would exceed that by about 20+%. Fine, and they've calculated the number. What nobody has done until Councilor Wright and Councilor Oliver did that is with all these changes in the village centers that are outside of the MBTA zone, what exactly are you talking about? Are you talking about the potential to add 2,000 units, 5,000 units, 10,000 units, 15,000 units? Of course you have to do this qualitative analysis. How can you have a rational discussion about what we're doing and plan for the future of the city if you have absolutely no idea what your changes could bring about? I mean, if you looked at Newtonville alone, for example, and you had a VC3 district and a VC2 district, you need to calculate, if you're doing that, approximately, not exactly, but approximately how many units you might get. We have not done that, and when I asked the planning department for that information in the village centers, they said to me in a meeting that you attended, they had not done that.
Wait.
Period.
Counselor, Mr. Lamel, did you not provide us a memo that it had the units by village? No. And I remember saying that there was. Nope. Yes, no. I've seen such a memo. I read it.
We have not provided the unit capacity of all proposed VCOD zones. We have also provided reasoning and rationale of why we haven't proposed or done that. I think Councilor Laredo disagrees with that rationale and reasoning, and that's completely fine. And we provided I think we've spoken about this in multiple meetings, and we provided some memos on that. I think that was a part of the conversations in the meeting you're referring to. And I think we're kind of at a point. It's put forward to you as the decision makers. If you agree with Councilor Laredo that this is critical information that is needed, I think you can make that decision. If you agree that it is not appropriate to provide that information because the number is not helpful for planning and providing city services and a variety of things like that, then you can go forward accordingly. I think that's the point where we're at right now. We provided the unit capacity for what we would submit to comply with MBTA communities. That's what we've done, and we provided a rationale for why we haven't done that for the entire zoning. And again, Councilor Oliver, you can agree that that's not appropriate, or you can agree that why it is appropriate.
If I could just respond, Mr. Lamel, you're certainly entitled to your opinion as to why you didn't do it, and that's something for the council to listen to and consider. But I want to be clear, it wasn't done. And so, President Albright, let's be clear, we're making decisions here, or being asked to make decisions, without any data as to what could be built and what that means for our city services. I, for one, am extraordinarily troubled by that, and that's why I welcome what Councilor Wright and Counselor Oliver have done, and I respectfully think that's critical information for decision-making. And it may be that we come to the exact same place that the planning department has recommended. And if that's the will of the council, that's fine. But we need to have the data. And I'm just going to urge us to listen very carefully and get the data. And if planning department is open to doing it, just doesn't believe it's needed, if the council thinks planning ought to be doing that analysis, then ask them to do it. And if it's the same as Councilors Wright and Oliver, great. And if it's different, that's fine too, and we can understand the differences. And again, if the council's wisdom doesn't think we ought to have any data, so be it.
If I could just respond just really quickly, we provided significant amounts of data throughout this process. We haven't provided that specific piece of data that you're requesting.
So, Councilor Lipoff, do you want to speak? Go ahead. And yes, I see you too. He hasn't spoken yet, so I'm calling on him first.
He usually sits there. I thought you were.
No, I'm sorry. I'm in the other room because I am listening in and need to comment on the Boylston Street Toll Brothers in a ZBA meeting. So I've been multitasking all night. But every time I hear a little fuss in here, I stick my head in. So I'm sorry if this isn't going to be in line, but just off the comments here, this is an ongoing deal. There's a ton of information and data we're getting from planning. There are some people that literally want to find out what this city is going to look like. We don't have a crystal ball. Do you want to know in 10 years, 50 years, 100 years? Do you want to know fully built out with 8,000 units? It's not going to happen. It's not a real number. That number is if we tore down every single property and built it to the max. That's not going to happen. And if it did, it'd be 200 years from now. So to ask for data 10, 15, 20, 30 years out when we don't know what we'll be doing with transportation, what we'll be doing with parking, what this city will look like, what needs our community and this country will have 100 years from now. It's really hard for some people to wrap their heads around this. It's not a real number, and it's something that we have to comply with. And I'm glad the MBTA law came along at the same time, because it pushes us along to see this in a much different way than we usually do. We're going to change the zone, and we're going to get this number of units. You're going to come for a special permit. We can know what our approval is going to do. This is very, very different. And we can scare people and talk about 8,000 units because the person who pays attention to sound bites is going to say 8,000 units tomorrow in the city of Newton. What's going to happen to our schools, our infrastructure? We are creating a framework that we are going to use as a council. And yes, a lot of this stuff will still be a special permit, but at least the framework is going to tell the people that are bringing forth new developments what we expect by right. And if they want to ask a little bit more, they want to change a setback, they're still going to ask for a special permit. It's not all going to be done by right. It's not all going to be done overnight. That's a good bumper sticker. We should print that. Honestly, people, we can't be such sticklers in the mud here, thinking, that the planning department can tell you, how many years out do you want us to go? What kind of assumptions do you want us to make? It's not possible. It's not going to happen. We have to think structure that we're going to govern in the future, and be honest with our citizens. Do not scare them about what we're doing. Be honest that this is a framework and it's not going to happen overnight, and be honest about what the MBTA number is. That's been upsetting me, that people are using that to stoke fear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lipoff. I wanted to add just one more point that no one has quite mentioned tonight. I think we might have talked about it at another meeting. We are on a deadline. That's not my point. We all know that. We have a limited number of meetings. President Albright mentioned that earlier. We can add one or maybe two, but we have a limited number of meetings, and we're pretty far along. At some point, what was it that Alderman Hesmahan said, you got to stick a fork in it? So what does that mean in this case? This is a big deal. It's a major change to our zoning, which we haven't done since 1987 and massively not since 1953. But at some point we have to put a stake in the ground and monitor the heck out of this thing. So you put it down, we're enabling so many more units. Let's say it becomes effective in January of '24. And we see what happens. We see what, we watch very carefully. We get maybe reports from planning and from current planning and ISD every 6 months to see what kind of permits are coming in. What are they looking like? How much are they asking for? Are we getting enough? Are we getting too much? Are we getting something we didn't anticipate? And we can always amend the zoning. So, we have people at both ends of the spectrum here saying, we're doing too much, we're not doing enough. We should make this a bigger, we love the MRT zone, let's put it in a lot more places. Why can't I have it too? I don't know what you're hearing, but I'm hearing that. Why can't I have this too? I want to be able to do this with my house. So we're going to have criticism from both sides, but our job, once we get to the other end of this, which I hope we do this fall, is going to be to watch what happens really closely and evaluate it as time goes on. So I just wanted to put that piece out there because the monitoring is our job and the next council's job and the planning department's job. We all have to be watching out for how this works. Councilor Wright.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I agree with Councilor Laredo. So one of the things we've asked repeatedly for months now, what is the total number? What is the total number? Yes, I don't expect it all to be built out, but we should have some idea. We weren't getting that total number, so we did it. So that number right now, with what's being proposed for the 8,330 units, is over 18,000 units plus additional that I haven't done the calculation for. With some tweaking, we still would do the 8,330, but we can get that down. Now, one thing that was concerning for me, and I went to many meetings on the MBTA Communities Act and by the MMA and different communities putting it out, or different state groups putting it out. They said, the complaint came up, why are you, requiring us to zone for so much? And they said, well, we don't expect it all to be built. And I don't either. But what shocked me was we expect 70% of it to be built within 20 years. And I think that's just a general idea. And for a place like Newton, that'll be a lot of tear down. I would hope that'll be a lot less. But we need, if we're even talking about that, we need to plan. We have to look at the other things, the other analysis to go with this. We don't have enough fields right now. We're putting artificial turf because we don't have enough fields for the people we have now. So what's our plans for more fields, and things like that. So I think it's very important to know what that total number is. And like I said, some changes with the special permits and this and that. And here I'm just looking at it, over 2,500 since 2020 special permits. That's just by special permits. And now we're going to be allowing it by right. That number is going to increase even more. So I think it's important to know what we're dealing with. Thank you.
Could you just have a clarification? 70% in 20 years? I don't think the planning department ever said that. But,
no, not the planning department, but that came from the state. And I'll find the meeting when they said that in like one of the MMA meetings in the Q&A.
Right.
When people were complaining, a lot of towns were pushing back, this is a huge number. And, they said, no, we don't expect that to be built. But they said we expect 70% to be built in 20 years.
Or do they want 70% in 20
I just
years?
don't, I think if you look at historic development patterns in Newton and other communities, that just seems completely unrealistic.
If I can interrupt here, this is what the fragility of this whole conversation is nobody actually knows. I did want to comment that at the next meeting, we are going to undertake an exercise to look at a street and examine the decisions that go into determining whether you would redevelop. And I think that might be helpful in terms of understanding how complex the decision is to redevelop a property.
Thank you. And Councilor Danberg and then Albright.
Just a short comment. I think that if someone did make a comment like that, it's irresponsible of them to have done so, because it's impossible for anyone to know, the MBTA or anyone else to know what percentage is going to be built anywhere under any circumstance. If they made that comment, then they should not have done it, because you can't make predictions like that and be right.
I was shocked by the number. I was shocked.
Okay. President Albright.
So here's something that I would like to know. I don't need to know exact numbers, and I'm sure there was a memo that where you guys put out the number of units by village, and I remember thinking that Newtonville was quite low, and things changed after that, but never mind. I'm looking for the memo. I haven't found it yet. But what I would like to know is that we started out with a concept of what are the large villages, what are the medium-sized villages, and what are the small villages? Have we kept that proportion, or did we change things? And I think that's a reasonable question to ask, and I hope that it's a reasonable question to answer.
We could probably answer that in more detail at another date. But I think everything has been building upon what has come before it over the last 2 years.
I remember a discussion at one point, and so maybe you can look into this, where that initial concept of large, medium, small was found to be not so useful, and rather it was the unique characteristics of each village, part of which is boundary and land area, but there are other elements, with or without transportation, with or without a grocery store, the relative density of housing existing around the village center. There's a lot in Nonantum, for example. There's not much in Waban, as another example. So there were so many factors that I remember that initial analysis by UTIL, where they talked to us at length. They did some preliminary analysis, what are the factors that contribute to the vitality of a village? And I remember whether or not it had public transportation wasn't as important, for example, as the existing density of housing and feet on the street and so forth that already existed in Nonantum. That was one I remember distinctly. That's a long ago memo at this point, maybe 2 years.
The first September meeting in 2021. Sorry that I know that, but I do.
But I don't want to lose sight of our goals. These exercises are interesting, but they're limited. These numbers, to me, I do remember a map that showed numbers of units per zone in each village center, but I'm not sure that it included villages outside of what we know we're able to use within a half-mile of public transportation. So I think that's the map you're referring to, but there were those numbers on the map. And I think the other reason that's been given several times in a memo and also in conversation in our meetings is that the MBTA compliance formula is just that. It's a way for the state to determine compliance across 177 or 71, I can't remember, very different communities, extremely different communities. And so they came up with a set of rules and assumptions. And this is what they came up with for us in terms of the number by our designation, but the assumptions in the formula are the same for all of them. So it's only useful for compliance. And again, when we talked about this at another meeting, but I want to raise it. So we're a big community. We've got 12 different centers we're doing, and Lexington was the first one to comply. And remember, they put forward their number, which exceeded what they were required to do. They're a very much smaller community. But they put forward the compliance number, and then they put forward another number that was their assessment of what would actually get built, which was a lower number. They went, as I understand it from planning, they went parcel by parcel and figured out the likelihood, what was existing. If the existing was close to what was going to be allowed, maybe it wouldn't get redeveloped. What's the ownership pattern? What are the particular factors influencing the potential for development? And they put forward that number. That would be a huge effort to do here. That's what was explained to us. But go ahead, Mr.
Yeah, I just have a real aversion to that, because I don't think the planning department, we're going to take you through an exercise next time to see the kind of decisions, but I would not want to put myself in the shoes of properties and suggest whether they're going to redevelop or not. I think that's a wrong thing to do, or even suggest a percentage at this point. I don't think you can win either way with that.
Okay. So but I wanted to, we're giant compared to Lexington. So whether or not it's a good idea, it would be an enormous undertaking. I see Councilor Baker. Do you have your hand up again? Is that a new hand?
I do. Yeah, very quickly, Madam Chair. This is a conversation perhaps was best reserved for next time, but I do think it's important to be clear that there are policy choices we've got to make, and either we make them in the context of a target number, or we make them in the context of what we think is good on the ground. And one of the, I'm assuming that part of both of those issues come into play, but I'm mindful that we had an analysis prepared by the planning department of specific parcels and the incentives that might incur, what would happen if this particular parcel were redeveloped. But I do recall Councilor Albright and I think several others were interested in the context, not the adjacent properties get developed exactly at the same time, but I do think it's important for us to be as clear as we can about what is the impact if multiple parcels in the same zone are developed in accordance with the rules, because each parcel will affect each other and then the parcels nearby. So I hope in our conversation next time we can keep that idea in mind, because looking at an individual redevelopment decision is not the only part of the question. It's what the context is going to be when those redevelopment decisions are exercised. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Yeah, Councilor Baker, that's the exact exercise that we're going to take on at the next meeting. We're having UTL look at that right now.
Okay, Councilor Leary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to align my comments with Councilor Lipoff, who just spoke a few minutes ago when we were having this discussion about how much data is enough. And I really think it's a foolish enterprise to go into such detail about exactly what changes, and there's just so many variables, but there is a lot of broad data out there. There's a lot, MAPC has a lot of data, the Urban Institute, the Lincoln Institute. There's a lot of good information that would be similar. Other communities of similar size have gone through zoning reform, and there are also broad principles that we know work. For example, if you build a lot of parking, you get a lot of cars. There's a whole book. It's this thick about the high cost of free parking. We know that we need to build more density in village centers to get people out of their cars or to make them less reliant on single occupant vehicles, and how people on the street, really help our economic base, our small businesses, our village centers. How if we build more bike lanes, particularly separated bike lanes, that you get a lot more people that feel comfortable riding their bike. So there are broad policies that work. What we've done over the last 100 years is build our cities around cars. And what do? You get the Mass Pike destroying our villages in Newton Corner and West Newton. You get them ripping up our train lines in favor of more cars that just get more cars. You build it and they will come. And we know that broadly what we're doing works. We've seen it work in other places. and it meets our goals for both climate change and housing. So I don't understand how going through parcel by parcel exactly what this means and what that means, I just think it's not going to give us the valuable information that people think it will. Frankly, I think it's just a delay tactic, and I think we should move, quickly as we can. And I'm not saying data is not important, it is, but I don't think we can just go into our zoning, deep dive, and take all this time to come up with numbers that could in fact be meaningless.
Thank you, Councilor Lurie. President Albright, I want to remind folks it's almost 10 after 10. But please go ahead.
I'll be quick. So I know I've talked about MU4 before, but nearly 10 years ago, we created the MU4 zone for our village centers. We have two. We have two. That's 100 and we have about not even 200 units were created, and we had MU4 almost 10 years. So it doesn't happen the way it is. 70% in 20 years is a ridiculous number. It just doesn't happen.
Thank you. Anybody else? Seeing none. Councilor Krinsman, you've been quite quiet. I think we need a motion to hold. How's that?
Move hold.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Thank you very much. We'll hear from the Law Department tomorrow. We will see you next Monday, the 31st. We'll have a staff meeting tomorrow and talk about how we time the meeting. You might be seeing something where we ask you to come in a little early next week as well. Thank you. Have a good evening.